Good evening. We'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I invite you to join us. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call.
Gehrig?
Here.
Pepcorn?
Here.
Preston?
Aye.
Strand?
Here.
Mahoney?
Here. First of all, I wanted to thank the Communications Department for working real hard on the budget that we presented today. I think they got great graphics, and I want to thank the Finance Department for a lot of the work they did as well. So hopefully you liked the format that they had. Health. As of July 23rd, Fargo Cass Public Health has administered 48,624 doses of COVID-19 vaccine. Cass County currently has 60% one-dose coverage rate, thanks to the combined efforts of the vaccine providers throughout the community. Being vaccinated against COVID-19 remains the best way to protect yourself, your loved ones, and your community from the impacts of the virus. Especially with the Delta variant out there, it seems that is more contagious. The Fargo Cass Public Health offers COVID-19 vaccine during the Tuesday walk-in clinics and by appointment and immunization program. Vax Up ND for all of us. The Fargo Public Library now offers notary services to the public. Those interested in this service should call the Maine Library Information Desk to confirm that the authorized notary public is available or make an appointment. The library continues to offer outdoor yoga for beginners at the Carlson Library Thursday evenings at 6:30 p.m. through the end of August. The library will have a booth on the book bike at the upcoming Native American Community Picnic August 7th at Trollwood Park. Librarians will attend this event to spread the word about the library's resources and upcoming library events. Tonight we have two videos from the Department of Communications and Government Affairs. The first showcases the new and novel concept of the Public Works Department, where they are using a remote-controlled lawnmower to become more efficient in doing better work, while also protecting employees from risky situations with steep inclines. The second is the city's next Faces of Fargo installment featuring Deputy Fire Marshal Don Stoltenwerk.
We got this one place over on 12th Avenue North there. It's too steep for any of our machines, because you bring like a traditional lawnmower over there, you know you can't get on it because you walk on it and it's almost hard to walk on. There's areas we haven't touched for 20 some years that this machine can get into now. This is a concept of a zero churn, but it has tracks on it instead of tires, so you have a better flotation. And the weight transfer of not having an operator on there is lower to the ground than it is having me up there, adding a higher center of gravity, and safer for me to be in a different position instead of on the machine on a steep slope. You got a controller like you want to run a remote control car. That's kind of pretty simple. It's just one little joystick and one flip switch. You can be away from it and you're not going to get hit by anything of the lawnmower throwing something. Getting out of dangerous areas where we don't have to be and keep the city more clean and look better for the people that pay for everything. I feel glad that they picked me to run the machine. I enjoy it. They keep looking for the best tools that they can find out there for the operators. They actually thought about the safety of the operator, and they want the right tools for the right job and get it done safely.
I've always wanted to do something where I'm helping my community. I have a degree in sociology with an emphasis in criminal justice from NDSU. As a deputy fire marshal for the Fargo Fire Department, some of my job duties include public education, code compliance, whether that be through fire protection system plan reviews, on-site fire inspections, and fire investigations. The value that I provide to the city is not in a response factor, it's more in the prevention factor. So it's important to me to know that I'm saving our community money through preventing fires and keeping them safe while they're in our community. Most people think of the fire department, think of us strictly as a response-based department, and the fire department actually is a very proactive part of the community. Through prevention efforts, we're able to reduce people's insurance costs throughout the city through our ISO rating. Well, being the first female in the department's definitely something to be proud of. I've never felt out of place on the department. The department's a very welcoming place in a family environment.
Very good. Is there a motion to approve the order of agenda?
I so move.
Second. Garrick, second. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carried. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda items? Or excuse me, is there a motion to approve the minutes of the regular June 12, 2021 meeting?
So move. Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda items 1 through 31?
So moved.
Second.
And second. Any discussion? If not, roll call, please.
Preston?
Aye.
Garrick?
Yes.
Pepcorn?
Aye.
Strand?
Yes.
Mahoney?
Aye. We'll go to the regular agenda. We have a resident's speaking time of 2.5 minutes, and we have the individual speaking tonight. Brandon Krager is up first.
Commissioners, today I would like to address the ward system that was discussed last week. Initially, I did not oppose it. Ward voting touts less expensive candidates, instance campaigning in smaller area, more diverse and equal representation throughout the city, more accountability for reps due to living among their constituents. Now, the cons of the ward system, the higher cost of salary, benefits, administrative expenses due to the increase of elected officials, polarization of community by partisan politics, and more territorial disputes making it difficult for councils to reach a consensus. After consideration as a citizen of Fargo, I did some research on the elections back to 2016. In 2016, elections there were 11 candidates and approximately 30,000 voters, and Strand and Grinberg won. In 2018 election, there were 9 candidates with approximately 22,000 voters, and Pepcorn and Garrick won. In 2020 election, there were 7 candidates with approximately 39,000 voters, and Strand and Arlette won. With some averaging of the population, the total comes out to about 25% of Fargo citizens got involved in the city elections. What I also saw in my research was that a majority of candidates running had already served as commissioner to Fargo or in the city government in some capacity, and very few were new to politics. Our city is in an interesting position. Trends show that Fargoians are comfortable with what we know. We don't like to change, and many faces we see in the city commission have experience. Incumbents are hard to defeat, with about 75% chance of incumbents remaining in their position. Opinions of myself and others, creating a ward system would tie us to the incumbent dilemma. Turnover will be low, and newcomers will be boxed out more than now. Incumbents in multi-member councils and free-for-all districts are more vulnerable, especially those with 4-year terms compared to 2. Also, with the amount of city involvement, 25% isn't very high, but that also means that the city is comfortable with who we have running. This goes to show the point that if it's not broken, don't fix it. The number of candidates and the percent spread that each candidate receives is not like we have a huge discrepancy with who is elected. The numbers don't necessarily show a need for more representatives on the city commission. Pitting wards against wards with different political backgrounds sounds like a pretty awful idea. You are 5 are elected to represent the city. You are 5 also the ones who are responsible for their votes and actions. Diluting the responsibility would only lead to finger pointing and creating wards that will lead to a collecting of power with like-minded individuals in different wards. Instead of keeping Fargo more in the middle when it comes to ideology. Approval voting was only passed a few years ago. I think we need to give it a chance. Thank you.
Paul Glei.
Commissioner Preston has placed a proposal for a rental registry on the agenda. I don't see a problem so much with large apartment complexes owned by professional property managers. But for years, the city's emphasis has been to support new development on the city's edges. Much of the Planning Commission's time is devoted to overseeing Fargo's expansion ever outward, and the core neighborhoods have to a large extent been left to fend for themselves. That means many single-family homes in core neighborhoods have passed into the hands of absentee owners who no longer have a personal connection to the neighborhood. Many single-family homes have been divided up into apartments for rent, with the owner not present. Since nobody has a personal interest in their upkeep, many properties have slowly declined, and as they decline, so does the quality of the entire neighborhood. And I know tenants who have declined to complain about derelict conditions for fear that their rent will increase. Implementing the core neighborhood plan will be an essential step in bringing a new vitalization to older areas of the city, but no plan will be successful without requiring the upkeep of rental units and improvement of derelict ones. So I urge you to establish a rental registry that will require rental properties to meet standards that will well serve both those who live in rental units and the neighborhood they live in. Thank you.
Christopher Cohen. Christopher Cohen. Jack Shaw.
My name is Jack Shaw, and I've got text messages from a neighbor that is on the committee. It'd be a shame if I shared you being completely able and not disabled, and then 2 months down along the line, have the city pull my handicap parking sign. I mean, that's hilarious. I've talked to the police. It's over because he parks anywhere he wants to on the street. I call the cops. So he's threatening me about if I call the cops on him again, he's going to turn me into disabled and say that I'm not. Well, he's part of the reason why my sign was removed. And I've also talked to some of the police department about the women that show up at his house. I've got pictures of 12 of them in the last 2.5 months. It is like I live by a whorehouse, living next to this guy. And I think it's a shame. You guys should have a little bit higher standards for you guys. I mean, he don't like to mow his grass. He keeps his bike parked out on the road for 3 weeks at a time. I mean,
Jack, let's keep to the issue, not the person.
well, that's it. I think he should be, at least resign, because
Again, keep to the issue. Thank you. Christopher Cohen, make it in. So at this time, I want to have a discussion with the commission on the resident comment period. I have a list of the commentators that we've had over the last several months, and it seems like we're getting repeated people coming back to the podium, oftentimes not talking about issues of what's going on. I think we originally opened this up to discuss issues and things that were happening, and we're actually giving free opportunity for people to be on TV and press some other items that really have nothing to do with the business of the commission. I would like to basically do a moratorium on the public element of this and redefine what we want at this time. It might be that on certain issues we open to public comment so we can hear it on those particular issues rather than having an opening where we can talk about anything. So at one time I was on the prevailing side that said we would continue it as, but I'm bringing it back up for rediscussion and I want to know what the commissioners would like to do. Open it for discussion. Commissioner Garrett.
If someone wants to speak on an agenda item, I'm more than willing to listen to them. But right now, we're talking about open mic night. It's whatever they want to talk about. I had no idea what Jack Shaw is trying to talk about. I have no idea what some of these people are talking about. If you want to talk about something that's happening in the city of Fargo right now on the agenda, then get on the agenda. I was a 24-year-old the first time I got on the agenda. It was not hard to do. I got on, I talked about an issue with my home, and I had 5 minutes to talk. And then Denny Walker gave me 5 minutes. If you want to talk about something that's happening on the agenda, get on the agenda. There's no barrier to that. So I would move to end open mic night.
Mr. Strand or Mr. Preston? Any comments?
Is there a
there a
motion on
second?
the table? There's a motion on the table.
Oh, I'm sorry. Motion's on the table. Is there a second? Is there a second? Okay. Further discussion?
Yeah, if I could say something. I think as we came out of COVID, we are seeing a little more variety probably in the individuals coming forward. 2 out of the 3 tonight had something to say very directly about an agenda item tonight and an agenda item that we had last week, at our last meeting. I believe strongly in having an open period when people can talk about their concerns, and those concerns may not be an agenda item. And in fact, there may be times when an individual may have difficulty getting somebody, one of us, to put it on the agenda. So I would like to see it stay. And it doesn't have to be every meeting perhaps, but I'd like it to stay in some form.
Commissioner Pipcorn? Mr. Strand?
Mayor, I wouldn't want to squelch public speech, but I also know that we have to be careful with it at times. One option might be to, if we keep it focused on topics on the agenda proactively, but maybe we move the other comments toward the end of the meeting and try it that way for general comments. So folks that want to share with us, sit through the business meeting, listen to us deliberate, and then we can listen to their sentiment. Try that. I would suggest trying that before we get rid of public comment.
Mr. Gurr?
The vast majority of people that come up and spoken are the same 5 people. And they say the same 5 things. This is not an open discussion. This is people who are saying the same, they have an agenda, say the same 5 things, same 5 people for the last 6 months. Give me a break. We're not listening to the public. We're listening to the same 5 people saying the same 5 things. So to say, well, I don't want to squelch public debate, I don't want to deter you from talking, get on the agenda. It takes nothing. I was 24 years old. I had just bought a home in the city of Fargo. I knew nothing about city government. And I got on the agenda, I got to speak in front of Denny Walker and the rest of the city commission for 5 minutes. And I was able to get out what I thought about the city of Fargo and what was happening. It's not what you guys are propping it up to be. It is people airing weird grievances, ultimately. Stop it. If you want to get on the agenda, get on the agenda.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Preston?
if I could say one more thing. I think the reason that I was supportive of this happening initially was because it was so confusing about who was allowed to come up and address an agenda item and who wasn't. There were individuals that were being purposely excluded, and other individuals were being purposefully invited to come up and speak to agenda items. So, if we could make those rules really clear and we stick to them, I have no trouble with public comments within the agenda item, but we've got to be consistent about how we apply it. And we weren't. When I first got on the commission, it was not consistent.
Any other discussion? Item 33, public input opportunity, public hearings. A continuation, the first one, item A, is to continue to 8/9/21. The second, as well as to continue to 8/9/21. Can I have a motion for both of those, please?
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to continue A and B.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Roll call vote.
Pepcorn?
Aye.
Preston?
Aye.
Garrig?
Yes.
Strand?
Yes.
Mahoney?
Aye. We have a community development block grant and a home investment partnerships program amendments to the 2020 action plan, the 2019 action plan, and the citizens participation plan. Tia Brassett to talk.
Good evening, Mayor and City Commissioners. I'm back again. I'm Tia Brassett from the Community Development Division within the Planning and Development Department. I'm here to introduce item 33C, which covers proposed amendments to our HUD action plans and citizen participation plan. Upon closing of this public hearing, staff will be seeking action to approve proposed amendments that I will be covering here. You have seen some of these already, but the 5-day public comment period that we were using and that was allowed throughout the pandemic has since expired and was expired, in fact, the last time we were here introducing some of these, but we have been asked by HUD to redo the public comment period for the full 30 days. Today is day 30, so we've done that. So you'll recognize a couple of these as I'm going through them, but yes, our 30-day public comment period is back in effect now, so no more of the 5-day. And so these proposed amendments are outlined in your packets, but I'll quickly run through them with these slides here. This first amendment is related to address identification and determination of project budget and scopes. It further defines the projects of Lake Agassiz Habitat for Humanity and Cass Clay Community Land Trust. This photo is the future build site of a single-family home. This address is 1529 10th Avenue South in Fargo. It's just, south or north of Carl Ben Elementary School. This is a lot that the city purchased with Community Development Block Grant funds last year and has since donated to Habitat for Humanity. And in addition to that, we'll be putting approximately $185,000 to $200,000 into the build of this project. And this is already an activity that was approved. We're just required to come and talk about, okay, we've identified the address, the exact budget, and what exactly we're doing, which is single-family new construction. Same thing with this property. This is for the Cass Clay Community Land Trust. These are 2 future build sites. We will be donating 1 lot where a blighted home once stood and then provide funds to purchase the other lot, as well as provide funds to demolish the one that you see on the right that's scheduled for demo. That is one that will be providing up to $200,000 to demolish and rebuild. They'll either build a twin home on this lot or 2 single-family homes. And this is located at 1410 and 1412 First Avenue South. So since we had the opportunity to redo a 30-day public comment period, we asked ourselves what are some other things that we will bring at this time. And one of them is a simple budget change in our 2019 action plan. So when we got our COVID dollars, a certain amount of those could be used for administration, but we do have enough in our 2020 budget to not need those for admin. So we'll be suggesting to move this $98,000 amount from the administration dollars to COVID housing supports, which has already been approved and has actually been happening now for over a year. This includes like our rental assistance programming that we've been doing, housing navigation with the Gladys Ray Shelter, operations for homeless prevention and diversion, and so forth. So the recommendation is that we move those funds because they will be spent rather quickly with that need persisting. And then the citizen participation plan, you are all familiar with this. This is a plan that HUD requires every grantee to have that just outlines how we work and coordinate with the citizens in our town. So we've been here a lot, you've noticed, and most of that is because of what is in our citizen participation plan. So we're recommending revising it to minimize the confusion as to why we're always here, because it's pretty natural to have a lot of the changes that we have been doing. And so we minimize the number of times that we're required to be here. And HUD actually only technically requires us to be here twice. Well, actually once in front of you guys per year. And then one is a public meeting that we do to solicit ideas on activities and how we should be spending our funds. So we are going to aim to do that. At least we're proposing that and seeking your approval. And again, this is the 30th day of our 30-day public comment period. We have not received any comments to any of the items that I've just presented to you. And this draft of our our citizen participation plan has been online for the past 30 days. And if you haven't had an opportunity to look at it, it's there. So yeah, that was one of the suggestions that we thought we would bring to the table this evening. And so these are the only other times we would be here is for our initial approval of all plans, activities, and budgets. So when you see me here presenting the full activity, saying what ideas we're going to be doing, what the budgets are, we'll still be here for that. Changes in funding and adding or canceling an activity, major changes when we allocate income from program activities such as reimbursement, repayments, reallocations, and then just changes in allocation priorities. So we'd still be here for the important things, but not every time we have a little address change or a minor dollar amount change. So with that, I would invite answering any questions that you might have, or anybody in the audience. If you have any questions other than that, I would invite you to open the public comment hearing and then approve to move forward.
Is there anyone in the public who wishes to speak to these changes? Is there anyone who wishes to speak? I'll close the public hearing. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Is there moved and seconded? Any discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Strand,
Yes.
Preston,
Yeah, aye.
Garrig,
Yes.
Pepcorn, Mahoney,
Aye. Item D, application by the Tecton Products for payment in lieu of tax exemption for a project located at 4401 15th Avenue North, which the application will use in operation and design and manufacturing custom fiberglass putrid parts. Jim Gilmore to explain.
This is an application that you've seen before. Tecton originally applied in February for a 100,000 square foot addition. By May, they thought that wasn't big enough, and so this application is for that $50,000 square foot incremental increase. They want to build a 150,000 square foot building now rather than 100,000. And so you've already approved the first, I guess, 2/3 of the building, and they're looking at this being even larger for the property tax exemption. The number of jobs, at least initially with the application, is the same as before. There'd be about 50 jobs over the next 3 years. The pay is all over $15 an hour. The property tax exemption would be at the 100% level for the first 5 years. And then for the next 5, it would be a partial exemption at 80%, 60, 40, 20, 10, declining over that 5 years. The Tax Exempt Review Committee is recommending approval. This has already been reviewed by the West Fargo School Board. They have voted to participate in both phases should you desire that. Cass County will look at the second part next week. They have given approval for the first part. Just to tell you a little bit more about Tecton, a reminder since last time, maybe I'll have Ryan Osheim from EDC talk about the types of jobs that we're trying to get here and how this company could look at other locations. And then we have 2 representatives from Tecton who can talk about how I believe even their pay has increased since they had initially applied earlier this year. Ryan, do you want to go first?
Thanks, Jim. Thank you, commissioners. So this, as Jim mentioned, this is a project that came before you in April, and at that time the commission approved the 100,000 square foot expansion. About that time was when our friends at Tecton kind of said, the size of the project and the scope of the work that we're looking at has increased substantially, and so they said we're going to look at another 50,000 square feet. So I think at the time the direction to them was come back once you finalize those plans and make the request for the additional 50,000. So as Jim mentioned, the West Fargo School District or the school board had approved both phases, the 100,000 and this incremental 50,000. But when Tom with Tecton gets up here, he'll talk about the jobs. I believe they're all over $20 an hour or somewhere close to that. So we're talking about really good paying jobs. We're seeing kind of overall as a market, with our manufacturing sector, we're seeing employers that are kind of raising the level of wages that they're offering to respond to the market conditions. But, Tecton, came here in 1992, 40,000 square foot building. They received a property tax incentive at that time, came back in 1997, requested a 20-year to add another 60,000 square feet. I think between that time and currently you've done an expansion in Virginia. So some of their growth has happened elsewhere. And now they're looking at this expansion, which is going to double their footprint and increase significantly their presence here. So big investment from this company that's part of this larger high performance window manufacturing cluster we have here. So I'll maybe turn it over to Tom to give you some of the real information on the company.
Thanks, Ryan. Thanks, Jim. Thanks, commissioners. You guys do a good job of covering everything and don't leave a lot for me, and I'm good with that. What I want to speak to today, I'll be respectful and not cover what they did, but I want to speak to the quality of jobs that we're bringing to the community. Entry-level production associate makes an effective wage of $21.12 an hour. If you work on the day shift, if you work on the night shift, $23.21 an hour. Very strong wages, up from when I was here in April. There's great demand for associates. That's great. We can bring these great jobs to the community. It's actually one of the things that we struggle with a little bit because our Roanoke facility, a different economic situation down there. So that's one of the things why we really struggle on this decision between Fargo and Roanoke is a lot of complex factors coming into it. Where should we go? Logistics say Fargo's the spot. Overall economics probably point to Roanoke. We are willing to make a commitment to the Fargo market as we want to move forward. Our growth is quite strong. That's driving the larger expansion. And there's a few things that come into play there. It helps us fill out our lot better going all the way up to the north and will fuel our growth beyond the 5 years. The 100,000 square foot, if we go with just that, it would be too tight. And then we'd be adding on again too soon. And based on the explosive growth that we're seeing this year, we also want to build in contingency into our growth plan. So I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody has or any dynamics that are different from when I was here in April.
Any questions?
Mr. Chairman?
Commissioner Preston?
I don't know if this is for Jim or for you, but so I'm assuming this, the report on the amount of in lieu payment and the savings is related to the incremental, the additional 50,000, or is it the entire 150,000?
So it's the entire thing, the additional, what's in the packet, that's the entire thing. It won't, the additional 50,000 square foot on its own isn't driving more jobs, but it lets us fit in better and that sales better and then gives us, growth beyond the 5 years. If we filled that out, hopefully we filled that out, Lisa filled it out. I think we did it right.
Is that correct,
Yeah,
Jim?
Commissioner Preston, if you look at the pilot payment line item that's on, I believe it's listed as page 12, that's for that incremental increase. The pilot payment for the first phase will be double that in years 6 through 10 because of 100,000. But the first 5 years, both portions of the building would be exempt.
Okay.
So.
Okay, then my second question was the job growth projected. It's the same because you're applying for the entire 150,000.
That's correct. And in both cases, the recommended approval because of the number and the quality of the jobs.
Any other comments, questions? Commissioner Garrick?
In what year, Jim, will we look back and say, did they build what they were going to build? And did they hire who they're going to hire at the price they're going to pay? At what year are we going to do that?
I mean, I think what we're planning to do, I've been meeting with the administration team, is that each year we would look at, after completion, each year we would look at the number of jobs created. We have some business incentive agreement forms, and they would say, we're going to have jobs on this schedule, If they don't meet that, then we would come back to you and you could consider reducing the pilot incentive.
There's an agreement here that we signed and they signed. And in nowhere does that say that in year 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 15, do we look back and say, did you do what you're going to do? Did you build what you're going to build? I appreciate you growing with Fargo, and I'm happy you're doing that. I'm glad you're getting the incentive. But at what point does the city of Fargo look back and say, in concrete, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, what year are we going to look back?
You know, we've talked about that in a policy. Maybe Commissioner Pepper
I got it.
wants to
Commissioner
address
Pepper,
that.
Let him
Tim,
answer.
I got it. I
No,
got it.
No,
Mr.
I've got the floor.
Mr.
I've got
Chair?
the floor, Tim.
Just hold
I've
on.
got the floor.
Hold on.
If you look at past business incentive agreements, they keep monitoring until they create the number of
Who's they?
jobs. The city should be receiving those reports. We're trying to figure out.
Have we
do
ever clawed back in the history of Fargo? In the history of these incentives, have we ever clawed back?
No, in one case.
The answer is no. The answer is no, and you can stop there. So these incentives are out of control. It's a runaway train, and Dave can giggle as much as he wants to, but it's a runaway train. We have never clawed back when businesses over and over and over again have not produced. Nothing against your company. Your company is great. We have never clawed back and said, you didn't produce the jobs that you said you would produce at the wage you said you would do it, at the amount of money you said you would put into that company. We have never clawed back, ever. Go ahead, Dave. Defend that.
Commissioner Pepcorn.
So, Mr. Chair, I have a solution. When you're ready for a motion, I'll make the solution. And I don't need permission from Commissioner Gehrig to speak, I don't believe. Let me know when you're ready for a motion, and I'll have the solution.
You have permission.
We're still in our motion on the pilot right now is what we're at. I think, Jim, one of the things your response should be, we've never had a clawback because we've rarely had an unsuccessful project.
I can give you 20.
Let me finish.
I give you 20 right now.
Let me finish.
So, Mr. Chair, does he
Excuse me,
get to
just
talk
can I
whenever he wants
finish?
to?
Can I finish?
Yeah, absolutely.
So we've had successful projects, so that's part of the reason that has not been done. Number two, Commissioner Pepcorn knows on the Tax Exempt Committee, we have not had language in there that we necessarily look at everybody every year. And right now you are looking at as a committee. The Tax Exempt Committee is looking for the possibility of doing a clawback. So we are looking at that and seeing where it might be utilized. And I think your request has to be look back to the last 7 years, what's gone on.
At least.
Report will come to the commission and we can fully discuss it.
It's a runaway train, guys. Runaway train.
Any other questions right now, Jim, or questions for the team? Commissioner Strand.
Mayor, thank you. The city has partnered a lot with, recently, as you're aware, with businesses out in the industrial park to step up their transit so people can get to Tecton and get their jobs and access it with mass transit and with tap rides. Just a favor to ask, I hear we have like a half-hour difference in our schedules of when your schedule starts and when their schedule works. And if ever we could have a way to get us on the same page, that's just something to, if we could work on getting more people transit to Tecton, that'd be great. And we're all ears. The next comment is a question to you. All of us are looking at workforce development topics and issues and housing and childcare and all these various aspects of workforce development. But a question I'd like to ask is, what are you noticing in your hirings of what the needs of the workforce are? And a specific question, is there a need, in your opinion, for enhancing language learning so that your workforce has more opportunity to step up their English language?
So when we look at direct labor production hiring, the greatest need is really two things. As you mentioned, just communication skills, spoken language, and written language. The other item would be basic math skills, the ability to add and subtract and just identify whether numbers are larger or smaller, whether numbers fit into a range. So very elementary math skills. And we've talked about it as an organization. I mean, we would tap into another resource pool if we basically created a school to teach people elementary math. And it's like, man, we're not set up to do that. that is kind of overwhelming for us to do. As simple as it may sound, it's not simple at all. But that's my answer. It's a great question. Appreciate that.
Let's put our heads together on that and address those topics, Mayor, if we could. Thank you.
So yeah, and also I could comment on the transportation piece of it. We have a shift start time at 6:30, which I think just doesn't quite meet it.
Exactly.
Our sister company, the other 3 Marvin facilities that you may know, the one right next to us in Fargo and the other 2 in West Fargo, actually changed their shift start time to 5:30 as they went to 4 10-hour shifts. So we could use support in trying to get that not just pulled to half hour, but pulled even further. And we may want to look at what percentage of our workforce from the Marvin side was riding that, because that was up in the industrial park. I'd see it all the time. It would just be after our shift change. So it might be more than that half hour. It might actually be an hour and a half that we might need to try to shift it.
Thank you.
Commissioner Preston.
So I'm surprised to hear that the Skills and Training Center doesn't do this kind of elementary math or communication skills. That isn't happening there, huh?
So I'm sure there are spots where people can get that training. The workforce that is coming to us is not trained. And then when you start, we've done it before where we've paid some workforce people to go get trained. And then you're on a slippery slope of do you do that? Do you do that for everybody? If you do it for everybody, it kind of becomes uncontrollable. So I'm not saying there aren't ways for it to get done right now. The workforce coming to us
Gotcha.
doesn't take advantage of any way that there is, or many of them don't.
So they're not getting routed to that educational opportunity probably for some reason.
Yeah, if it exists, they're
Or
not.
if it exists, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what all goes on at Skills and Tech anymore. I haven't participated with the programs in a while.
United Way has a program they've just come to us and requested a funding for, Commissioner Preston, and it's something we should look at because it's trying to address that. Commissioner Strana listened to their presentation, but it is to get to the element you're talking about. So we might consider that. We'd look at United Way. We just had a presentation on it.
We do a math skills assessment that we'd be happy to share.
Sure.
To show the type of things that we are looking for in people, and it's pretty basic.
We can send them to him, right, John? You remember our contact? Is there anyone in the public who wishes to speak to this pilot? Anyone in the public who wants to speak to this pilot?
I'd like to point out that the federal minimum wage hasn't been increased since the early 80s. I think it was 1980. So it would be, currently it would be $24 an hour. So we should be looking at that as the basic minimum wage. So any company that's not paying at least $24 an hour isn't really paying a living wage. So we have to consider how are workers going to live on anything less than $24 an hour? Because I think the public right now is thinking that $15 an hour is really a good wage to get. If Amazon or other company is going to pay $15 an hour, wow, they really did a good job. No, $24 an hour should be the basic wage that they should be paying. And maybe they should be paying more than $24 an hour. Thank you.
Is there anyone else from the public wish to speak?
Good evening. As being an employer in this area, I do have concerns why they cannot offer their own on-the-job site training, just as Bethany does. Tecton is a huge company. We've heard a lot about them, but I'm just concerned about the way that some of their employees have described their behaviors in working there. And so that does, as a citizen, I do have some issues with that, and I think that they should be able to offer, just as daycares and Marvin Windows and others that offer on the site job training. So if you need mathematics, then you should be able to go through a class to get that right there. Thank you.
We'll close public hearing. Do I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion, and included in the motion is that we'll have a summary of the number of employees that they are going to create each year and the salaries, and then what we'll have them do, sign the agreement, the leader of Tecton and the mayor will sign it, and then each year provide a report to their assessor's office whether they're following through with it or not. And that's how we resolve our issue. Thank you.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Commissioner Preston. Any discussion? Commissioner Garrick.
With that motion, we have a report, that's great. What if they don't meet the test? Are we gonna penalize them? We can have the test, but if you fail the test, then what?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Preston.
so in this agreement, is there a clawback option?
Yes, our current agreements that say if you don't create a certain number of jobs, that would go back to the city commission to make a decision. Do you end the incentive? Do you give them more time? I made reference to the one instance that I can recall when someone wasn't meeting the requirements, came to the city. I think at that point they gave them more time because the economic conditions at the time.
So there is no clawback option.
There is a clawback option in that agreement that if you don't meet it, because in the business incentive agreement, it says if you don't meet this number of jobs, that then the incentive would end.
Okay.
Commissioner
Well-
Pepcorn. Oh, excuse me.
So, Mr. Chair, we do have a clawback included, and what should happen then is it goes back to the Tax Exempt Review Committee, and we'll review it. To give an example, last year with COVID, then what do? I mean, obviously, there was a lot of businesses that were having a lot of struggles, and so then we as a city commission make the call. If we want to do a full clawback, that's within our rights. So we do have it, and it is included, and so this will solve a lot of issues. Thank you.
Commissioner Preston, you weren't quite finished, I think, right?
Yeah, I'm confused here. What you're describing to me is not a clawback. That is just stopping the incentive. And Commissioner Pepcorn is saying there is a clawback option, which is the
Yeah.
case.
I'd have to go read one of the draft development incentive agreements. You could do it either way. The city assessor can, I think up to go 2 years back, assess someone that had previously been granted a tax exemption if there's an error or it was in some agreement. But I believe it's only a 2-year look back you can go at.
Okay, and let me clarify. I understand fully that there's circumstances that might interfere, and you have to certainly give a little extra time, but there should be an option to claw back if a person or a company is not meeting their goals.
I believe that's what Commissioner Pepcorn is including in his motion, but I'm not sure.
We don't have to include the clawback, do we? Is that what you're talking about, Jim? That is included in our tax exempt policy.
Yeah, it'll have to be in the business incentive agreement and, either the clawback or just ending it, either way.
Be an agreement.
The state law does require a business incentive agreement and allows a commission after a hearing to end an incentive.
So, Mr. Chairman, could we add the clawback into my motion, if that's okay? And if my seconder is willing to second that, I would
Sounds
include
good.
the clawback.
Moved and seconded. Commissioner Strand.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd caution us, though, to make sure that whatever we do, we're consistent going forward and that it isn't Tecton, it's everybody. It's every application going forward. I'm getting nervous when we're honing in on this particular application right now and we're setting some policy about clawbacks and lookbacks. And we've asked for that, but I'm just cautious that what we do now isn't about Tecton, it's about everybody, but it's Tecton we're voting on now. But if we're not establishing a policy that's consistent going forward, that's replicatable, that's predictable, I think that's where we need to aim.
Mr. Chairman?
Commissioner Preston.
So I've been assuming that we're talking about a template agreement here, and that clawback option would be in every agreement.
Yes, that's what I'm assuming.
Okay.
Commissioner Garrick.
In my opinion, we've always had that clawback agreement. It's always been there. And John, you're right. It should be across the board. And Dave, I think you're right, your motion had that in there, because I think we've always had it in there. But my point is that we've never done it ever. In the last 40 years, longer than I've been alive, we have never clawed back $1 from a company who has said they'll do this, they'll do that, and they didn't, and we didn't take their money back. Radisson, there's a ton of companies. I can name you 20 that I have a file on that didn't do it. And I'm gonna have more coming from Jim, because you're on the hook for giving me more of those that didn't do what they said they were gonna do, and we never took back $1 because they didn't do what they said they were gonna do. But we gave them the incentive in full and never asked the question, did you do the thing you said you were gonna do? And they didn't. So that's why this needs to stop. This is a runaway train, and we're giving away tax dollars from the middle and lower class to the upper class, and we're clapping and we're patting ourselves on the back and saying what a great job the government did to grow the economy. But we screwed up, and there are 20 plus examples of that happening. And there's nothing to say to your company, but this is one more example of where we are not going to be responsible to the taxpayers about did this work or not, and we're not going to look back again.
So I just
You should all
remind,
vote no. You should all vote no again and again and again.
so I'd remind the commissioner that as Commissioner Strand talked about, we'd like to change policy. We should have it in place.
Changed 20 years ago.
Let me finish. You were not on the commission 20 years ago, so you did not, nor did this commission, offer those pilots or tips to anybody. It was a policy that was in place, and now, just like we always do in policy, the Tax Exempt Committee reads and puts it in some policy. I will bet when we look at our tips and pilots, they actually were very successful. But to you, if you would like to change policy, concur with Commissioner Strand, then that's going forward what we will have for different people. A little bit confused about clawback versus getting rid of the exemption. Because if you get rid of the exemption, that in essence is making them owe more money. They have to come up with money. A clawback would somehow mean we'd go back and get some money back from them. So that, I think, has to be fined a little bit. If a company's projections didn't work out because the economy goes sour, it's a little tough for them to go after the company and pay us even more without causing some other things that harm the company. So as I understand it, this particular motion is for the Tecton will include looking at a clawback as well before you sign the agreement with them. Is that correct, Jim?
Yes, we can do that.
Okay.
I believe there was an amendment made, so we need to vote on the amendment and then the motion. There was an amendment made.
So the amendment was to add the clawback as part of the process. Is there any other discussion on that? Roll call vote.
Pepcorn?
Aye.
Preston?
Aye.
Gehrig?
Yes.
Strand? Mahoney?
Aye. Now we can go to the main motion. The motion is stated would be to approve this pilot of the additional 50,000 space. Do I have any more discussion? Roll call vote.
Pepcorn?
Aye.
Preston?
Aye.
Gehrig?
No.
Strand?
Yes.
Mahoney?
Aye. Drought Status and Water Supply Project Update. Recommendation to approve the interim financing agreement Series C with the Garrison Diversion Conservative District, Lake Agassiz Water Authority, City of Fargo, and Grand Forks. Bruce Grubb to start the explanation.
Yes, thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. Troy Hall and I thought it would be good to provide the commission and the public, for that matter, with a drought status update for our area, particularly in light of the most recent drought data that we've been monitoring. This slide shows a colored map of the state of North Dakota and drought conditions. I think this was as of last Friday. And so tonight, as part of the update, we'll be sharing what our drought indicators are telling us. We'll have a suggested motion to establish a current drought phase and explain why and what that means to residents and businesses in Fargo. In addition to that, we will be asking the Commission for approval of a third interim financing agreement with the Garrison Diversion Conservancy District and the Lake Agassiz Water Authority, and that is for continued work on the Red River Valley Water Supply Project. And this third agreement is based on state funding that's been appropriated in the 2021 to 2023 biennium. So our presentation tonight actually has two parts to it. One, an update on the current drought status for Fargo, and second, that third interim financing agreement for our permanent solution to drought, which is the Red River Valley Water Supply Project. You've seen this before. I apologize for the repetitiveness, but we do operate a surface water system, and as such, rely on surface water supplies, those being the Red and Cheyenne rivers. We have 3 surface water permits, one on the Red River, one on the Cheyenne River, and one for water that's stored in Lake Ashtabula behind Bald Hill Dam. And having water supply redundancies is highly recommended in this water industry because it allows you the flexibility to switch water sources if you need to, due to things like insufficient flow or contamination or poor water quality. So today we have a short-term strategy and a long-term strategy for dealing with drought conditions. The short-term strategy is our drought management plan. The long-term strategy is, of course, the Red River Valley Water Supply Project. So I'd like to call on Troy Hall, our Water Utility Director, to give a brief review of our drought management plan, share what our indicators are telling us, and then we've got a recommended motion for establishing a drought phase. So Troy, could you take us through that, please?
Thanks, Bruce, Mayor, Commissioners. Yeah, so moving on to our drought management plan. What we do have is a phased drought plan. So when we look at, have a phase 1 normal, which we're in right now, and we promote conservation. And just so you know, just as a FYI, I did look back at the data, and from a conservation standpoint, since about 1980, our per person use of water has been reduced by about 40%. So some of the plumbing fixtures and some of those practices have produced conservation. So we are practicing that. But so right now we're in the normal phase. We have a phase 2 advisory, a phase 3 warning, and then a phase 4 emergency. So drought response, right now, we're in phase 1. So drought response, we're looking at just voluntary conservation. We put out a release normally every year for voluntary odd even watering restrictions from Memorial Day to Labor Day. And then some hydrant flushing restrictions, just voluntary. As we move into phase 2, that's where I guess the big item with phase 2 is the mandatory odd even watering restrictions. And what that is if you had an odd number house, you water on the odd days of the month. If you have an even number house, you water on the even days of the month. The other one that is to consider is some hydrant flushing restrictions. And then as we move through the phases, it gets more restrictive.
Commissioner Garrick has a question.
Troy, just so we can be clear, is there a penalty if you are watering your lawn on the wrong day?
What we would do initially, I think initially just monitor and just give an FYI reminder to people. I think there is ordinance language to address it if there's no response at some point. But the first steps are just try and encourage people to help us out. Normally they're pretty good about that.
Do we know what the ordinance is? I mean, because you're going to have people, if we do this, calling the cops, right?
Right.
And they're going to your house if you're watering the lawn. Is there language that says it's $100 fine, $50, whatever it is?
Yeah.
Just people are aware. So I realize people want to be good neighbors and not do it the wrong day.
Right.
Is it going to be a nuisance for the police or whatever?
Right.
If people are watering on the wrong day.
Yeah, and then in the ordinance, and it's not very real specific, but what it does, it says fines, and I believe it says water shut off too, so that would be a method to deal with it as well. But that's in the ordinance, and we hopefully don't need to get to that point. But that's a very good point that you're bringing up. So.
Eric Johnson, maybe while he's doing his presentation, if you want to just check what the ordinance and the fine is, that'd be helpful. Go ahead, Troy.
Yep. So the other thing I was just going to mention with this slide is we get into the phase 4, the ban. What we're trying to get to ultimately is more of a wintertime water demand. The thing I did want to mention though is phase 4. If we get to that point, it gets really severe. We just built a new membrane water treatment plant. What phase 4 probably means to me is we're going to have Cheyenne water is probably our only available source, and the membrane plant was really built to handle that Cheyenne River, which is really Devil's Lake water now, so it handles the salt. Our 97 plant, it doesn't do quite as well on 100% Cheyenne water. If we're mixing the flows, that's fine. But I just want to point out that the new plant would help us out tremendously in this situation. Then we get into water reduction goals. Really, the normal phase, you're really looking at percent reduction is what we're trying to achieve. So phase 2 advisory, we're looking at 0 to 10%. Phase 3 warning, we're looking at 10 to 25%. And the emergency, we're looking at 25 to 38% or more. And really what we're trying to do is eliminate the outdoor water uses and get to more of a wintertime water demand.
Commissioner Preston.
Sorry, Troy, can
Yes,
you go
ma'am.
back? So these phases, how are they determined? Is it based on the drought data that you're getting? Is it based on the river level? What's it based on?
Yep, and I think that's a really good question, and I think I'll get to that in the next couple
sorry.
slides. So perfect, yeah, good. You helped me lead into that.
Just ahead of him.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So here you go. So what we do is we have a scoring system that looks at our indicators. Really, these are the 4 indicators: is the Palmer Drought Severity Index, the Standard Precipitation Index. The first slide that you saw, the lead slide, I believe that was the Palmer Drought Severity Index, just a slide of North Dakota showing how severe it is. Then we look at stream flows, reservoir levels. So stream flows would be red in Cheyenne River. The reservoir levels, that would be like Bald Hill Dam, Lake Ashtabula by Valley City, and then Orwell by Fergus Falls. We also, in our plan, there's infrastructure triggers just in case we have like water main break or treatment plant issues, something like that. And then with our plan, we revised this in 2013, but what we do now is we have a tool that goes out and grabs a whole bunch of data out there in the region with the Palmer Drought Severity Index, Standard Precipitation Index, stream flows, all kinds of stuff. But we just pull that data and it pulls it in and populates our report. Makes it a little bit easier to produce. The graphic on the upper part here, this is the one I look at a lot. It's Orwell Dam by Fergus Falls. And we can see what's coming in to Orwell and what's being discharged. And that's what really feeds the Red River right now is the Orwell. So another thing we look at is the USGS stream flow data. So on the very left here, that's the Red River, and that is showing over in July here, showing a decline over time, and it's just drawing down. This is the Cheyenne River. I looked at the one near Kindred, and that shows a pretty severe drop here in the past few weeks, and then it's kind of stabilizing. But one of the things that we got just last Friday is I didn't see it yet today, but they were going to reduce flows out of Orwell, so it's going to drop the flows in the Red River. So another thing that we have to monitor our demand. This is a graphic from our control system, which I've shown before. The blue line, that's Fargo water demand. The green line, that's West Fargo water demand, and the total. And what this is it's a 10-day trend of our water demand information. So each of these, like this is a morning peak. So when you see the water use go up dramatically in the morning, then it tails off during the day, and then overnight it it's lower, and it goes the next day. And one thing, like last week, we had a pretty high demand. Then we got a rain, and it really dropped off the next day. So it helped. You can actually see that data when we in our control system. So this is something we monitor all the time. So if we were asking for a % reduction, we would see that probably pretty quickly in our control system and data.
Commissioner Gehrig?
So Troy, I mean, we get it. It's dry.
Yep.
The demand is the same.
Yep.
What are you asking of us?
Okay. Next, I'll just, so what we're looking at here is the stream flows. So what I saw with the stream flows, though, it's going to drop away. It's going to put our stream flow into a stage 2 probably by next week. Our polymer drought severity index and our precipitation index are really high right now. We weight our stream flows higher, but the stream flow is going to kick us into phase 2. So what I'm asking is to move to phase 2 tonight as a motion. And
Here's a suggested motion.
So I'll make the suggested motion, but I also want to add to it that we're not going to fine people until we need to. So I'll make the suggested motion with no fines.
Is there a second? You're making a suggested motion with no fine. Eric was going to report on the fines?
Yeah, I researched the drought management ordinance. There is, as Troy mentioned, sort of this administrative process that includes giving people warnings if they're violating these restrictions. Shutting off their water is one of the options, and pursuing injunctions and things like that. I mean, one of the things that's about this is maybe a little bit like emergency powers in a sense that once you create a drought, you sort of create some regulations. What are you going to require? So it isn't set up like a criminal ordinance where you set up exactly what the fine is that way. And so that's why. From what I can tell, there isn't like $100 fine or something for a violation.
Troy, just for
That could be
clarification,
implemented, but it isn't. right
if
now.
we have what you've suggested as a motion, is that includes fines then if there has to be?
I'm okay. Well,
But I mean, the phase 2, when the city's figured out drought control
Yep.
in different phases, we
Yep.
follow different rules. So
Yep.
according to what we've set up, if we go to the drought status, which we're concerned about, in phase 2, it could include a fine.
it could.
Yeah, okay. Commissioner Gehrig?
And that's kind of the point is, if we get to a point where we really are in more of an emergency status, we go to a 3 or a 4, which does have fines still, we could do that. What I'm asking people if we're going to do is be responsible. Don't water every day, those type of things. It's just like wearing the masks, right? Be responsible, do it on a condition. But right now, hey, we're in a phase 2. Please don't water every day. And we'll go from there. So again, suggested motion, no fines.
Is there a second? Is there a second? Can I have another motion? The suggested motion.
Mr. Chairman, I would move to approve as the staff is suggesting.
Is there a second?
Second.
Further discussion? Special Strand.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm trying to get my arms around this concept that we're fighting for the ability to water our grass when the state's in a drought. It's so severe out there. And for us to have the luxury of having green grass when our aquifers are drying up, our fields are drying up, our farmers are in trouble, the livestock industry is in trouble. This isn't that we're an oil state anymore, we're an ag state. And we need to, I think, acknowledge the reality that our ag state is facing. And if we're not going to participate in pulling in our belts a little bit and conserving some water, because we care about some green grass, I think our values are just in the wrong place. My view is if we're in a drought, we act like we're in a drought, and you don't be watering your yard. Don't be wasting your water. This is a precious commodity. The world is demanding water. And we're like treating it like it's just like we can just waste it. So my view is we tighten it up and we put some teeth into this. If we're in a drought, let's acknowledge we're in a drought. Tell people, quit watering your yards. Pull back on your use of water. Do what you need to do for the greater good. That's my view.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Commissioner Preston.
the city isn't watering any of our grass anywhere, right? Have we pulled back on any watering that we might have been doing on our property? We better be.
Well,
We just started this.
I can speak to I can't speak to the other facilities, but the water plant site, we have been trying to get some grass zero and construction areas, but we're gonna, as soon as this ordinance, we already talked about, we're gonna follow exactly what we did in the.
Can somebody answer the question for the rest of the buildings and property?
We're just going to this tonight, so up to this
I
point,
know.
there would be no,
But-
there'd be no reason to do this unless there
No.
was drought fraction. Commissioner, or Bruce Grubb, do you want to respond?
Well, Commissioner, I think the answer to that is that at a minimum, we better be observing the odd, even watering schedule because, you know, a number of years ago when we adopted the drought management plan adopted by the commission, we selected 4 indicators that we would constantly monitor for drought. That's what we do every day. And we indicated that a phase change would be quantifiable. And so that's what we have today. Not to go to a drought emergency, but based on the data that we've retrieved, it justifies going to a phase 2. And so that's the staff recommendation to stick with the plan.
I would suggest strongly we quit watering. I understand it's harder on the grass when you don't water it thoroughly anyway. It goes into a dormant status. Let it go into a dormant status.
And we've certainly done that out in front of City Hall. I don't know if you've noticed that lately, but no watering going on there.
Commissioner Garrick.
Bruce and Troy are being modest. They looked at this years ago and said, we need to have more than one source of water, the Red River. Then they took the Cheyenne. And what was it, 64 or 52nd Avenue? You guys brought that over, right? And we spent a lot of money as a commission to do that. And now they're talking about bringing it over from the Garrison Dam. And we're going to spend $100 million doing that. So these are forward thinkers. We are not in a situation where you need to not flush your toilets or not take a shower. We're not San Diego. We're not Mandan. We're not Williston. We're not San Diego. We're not Nevada. We're in a situation where maybe you shouldn't water your lawn every day. Maybe. And not everyone does. So why create this hysteria where you have to make a mandate with penalties where you find somebody or arrest somebody or someone's calling their neighbor or calling the cops on their neighbor for watering their lawn? Don't overreact. It's such a government thing to do. Let's overreact and call the cops. You guys, we're dry. It's fine. We have a lot of water. We're fine. So again, there needs to be no penalties for this. Ask people to reduce their amount. As a city, per capita, we have reduced the amount of water we've used per person over the last 20 years by what, 15, 20 gallons a person per day?
Yeah, that's
We're doing pretty good. So let's not create mandates and hysteria and penalties. What a government thing to do.
Any other comments? Roll call vote.
Preston?
Aye.
Pepcorn?
Aye.
Garrick?
No.
Strand?
Yes.
Mahoney?
Aye. You have a continued report on the next part, right? Or
Yes, and I'll move past the slides that you've no doubt seen before, but you might recall back on November 2nd of last year, we presented 2 interim financing agreements called Series A and Series B. And these agreements were necessary to allow construction to start on certain components of the Red River Valley Water Supply Project. That was important because the required federal and state permits for the project had been approved, so it was critical to get the project started before those permits expired. The reason there were 2 separate agreements was because they were subject to different state cost shares. The Series A agreement involved a 90% state, 10% local cost share and was tied to the 2017 to 2019 biennial budget, state budget. The Series B agreement involved a 75% state and 25% local cost share and was tied to the 2019-2021 state biennial budget. That being said, both of the agreements were necessary to start up construction on the project. Certain critical components, including a Missouri River intake wet well, certain sections of the transmission pipeline, and a discharge structure on the Cheyenne River. And so what was approved back in November was a Series A agreement that I just described. At the same time, a Series B agreement approved in November as well. And tonight we're in front of you with the third Series C agreement. This is also subject to a 75% state, 25% local cost share, except this is related to state funding in the 2021 to 2023 budget. So Fargo's share of the funding for costs associated with Series A and B were budgeted over the 3 budget cycles, 2019, 20, and 21. And the cost share for the Series C agreement has been included in the 2022 budget that you heard a little bit about over the noon hour today. So with that, the staff recommendation is to approve the interim financing agreement, Series C, associated with 2021 to 2023 biennium construction activities on the Red River Valley Water Supply Project. And I would also like to recognize that Mary Meridian is with us tonight as well. Mary is with the Garrison Diversion Conservancy District and is the Deputy Program Manager for the project. So Mary, thank you for being here again, and she can help answer questions about permits or technical items related to the upcoming planned construction activities. Thank you.
So as chairman of Lake Agassiz, I'm very excited about this because we're finally moving ahead with construction. We're going to have 3 phases of it. We got more money from the state than we've ever got, 89 million basically this year. So Mary's been working very hard with the state to try to get this. We're also negotiating for a 40-year 2% loan from the state as well. And the state has been very active in trying to push drought protection for our community. This is a second big step for us to go forward with this. And like John, to your point of the drought, we have to be prepared because if we have a major drought, it's $30 billion worth of damage in our community. And Fargo is one of the biggest communities in industrial use that we've opted for. And as we know, we've got a lot more industry in the community than we had 10, 20 years ago. Commissioner Pipcorn has been working as an alternate too on Lake Agassiz, and we've been working quite nicely with Garrison. Feel it's a great partnership. We worked out our MOU this year as well, but together as a group, we think it's moving quite nicely. So I'd ask for the suggested motion.
So move.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion, Commissioner Gary.
To your guys' point, this is an amazing project, and what a steal at that price. Bruce, is that the original price? It seems lower than what you had briefed earlier a couple of years back.
I don't think I showed the total price. Mary, do you have the total with you? What I'm showing now is, I don't know if I mentioned, Series A and B, Fargo and Grand Forks agreed to cover the local cost share. Series C and forward, Garrison will be financing the remainder of the construction with the water users just paying the local debt service allocation based on the water that we've
and to that point, is that the all-in cost or is there more to come?
No, there's more to come. Yeah.
Okay. So that's why I thought it was lower. But again, fantastic project. This year is exactly the reason we want that. That's why I said to you and Troy, you're visionaries on this. People have always been talking about the flood justifiably, but in a drought season, we understand why this is so important. So this is a fantastic project. What a savings, what a low cost to bring us water. So this is necessary and great, and I hope everyone is in full support of it.
Any other comments or discussion? Mr. Pipcorn? Oh, I thought I hit your button. We're okay? Roll call vote?
Strand,
Yes.
Pepcorn,
Aye.
Garrick,
Yes.
Strand, sorry, Preston,
Aye.
Mahoney.
Aye. We'll take a 10-minute break, come back 6:30. I think we'll start early because Brenda's ready and she's got some great photos, and it's not public hearing or anything. It's just going to be a construction update. So let's start up again, and Brenda, Derek, please explain what's going on in construction.
Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. Jeremy Gordon's going to be joining me at the end of the presentation for some additional updates on our Quiet Zone project, and then an update on the North Broadway Bridge. So as of to date, we have not had any safety incidents with our construction activities. Like we talk about every other meeting here, we've got 3 sites that we keep up to date on our projects. We have our Twitter, our Facebook account, and then our fargostreets.com. So what you're gonna start seeing is the completed project list is gonna continue to get longer. And so at the next presentation, I'll be adding quite a few more projects into that. We're just closing out quite a few projects here. We've had some beautiful weather this summer. So what we've got is we've got quite a few still ongoing and finishing up projects. We've got our 64th Avenue overpass, 38th Street, Regional Pond, multiple new additions that we are completing. Along with the work up along by Amazon, we do have the roadway finished, but we are still working on finishing up that storm sewer connection. So for our rehab and our reconstruction projects, we've got some work still on 7th Avenue, 11th Street, and North University, along with our citywide sidewalk and our mill and overlay. We also have our streetlight project. This is the last dark section that we are lighting up. And then we're also completing the widening of 40th Avenue by the Amazon site. We are also working on our flood risk management projects. We've got the North Side project, levee project, which is north of 40th Avenue, north of the airport. We have our Royal Oaks, Oak Grove, Elm Circle, and the Riverwood. So we still have some projects coming up to start. We are still waiting to hear. We have a large PVC pipe that's being delayed on the 21st Avenue. The new development, which is by on 45th Street by the softball diamonds, will be starting. And then I'd like to talk a little bit. We have our 13th Avenue concrete rehabilitation project that will be starting up, and we will be doing spot repairs, pretty large spot repairs on areas that are degrading early. And then we'll also be making the intersections, bringing them up to ADA compliance.
Commissioner Garrick, what does that mean for the red concrete there? What does that mean to make it?
That's just the area. So it's the project area is from 21st Street to Page Drive.
No, I'm sorry.
Oh.
The curb there to make it ADA compliant.
Yes.
What's happening there?
So right at the time that we did this type of ADA ramp, just a colored concrete with a groove was acceptable. Now we have to use truncated domes. And so we will bring those up to ADA compliance today. So at that day, they were ADA compliant. As that changes and improves, we want to make those improvements also.
Thank you.
64th Avenue, we are working on the embankment here. You'll see a couple of pictures, one looking west and one looking east. 38th Street, we are back working on the concrete paving there and finishing up on the left side there. You'll see finishing up the pond work and then finishing up the concrete paving. This picture I had to quick throw in. We're really done with the pond excavation, but I think it's really neat how you can see the design on the right and you can see the matching aerial design as the green grass is growing along there, and you can see it matching the design there. And then we are still working on the lift station of the pond. 7th Avenue, we've got phase 1 through 6 is complete. Phase 7 will open towards the end of August. And then phase 8, we will be closing now this week. Here's some pictures prepping for the paving and then some of the paving work. And then 11th Street is pretty much completed with the paving and the curb and gutter. And then now we're just finishing up with the street lights. North University Drive, phase 1 is open to local traffic, and we're working on the gravel on phase 2 on the north side
up to 40th Avenue. Here are some pictures of our flood wall on Oak Grove. And then this is the levee installation around Elm Circle. To the right, you'll see that's the Park District Road that we'll be rebuilding as part of the levee project. And then this is the lift station on the Riverwood Flood Risk Management Project. So on the left, we're looking south, and then on the right, we're looking north. And then Jeremy will do an update on our Railroad Quiet Zone and North Broadway Bridge.
All right. Good evening, Mayor, Commissioners. Brenda did a good job there. Now it's my turn to slow it down. No, I got just 2 projects to talk about.
You seem surprised. You sounded surprised by that.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, could I ask, can we have Commissioner Gehrig follow the rules? And can I ask you a question, Tony? Have you been drinking before the commission meeting? Answer the question.
Let's go ahead with the report.
Okay. So Railroad Quiet Zone, this has been a long time in the coming. There's actually 2 aspects of it. There's a city project to improve 16th Street and some sidewalks up there. And then there's a component that the railroad has to do, the signals and grade crossings. So our portion is with 95% complete plan-wise. The next step is to get an agreement with the railroad for cost share on the project. And then once we get that done, their signal team in Kansas City will design their improvements to their equipment. And next year we'll bid out our project and they'll complete their work. So hopefully a year from Labor Day, we can finally have it quiet up there. North Broadway, a lot of people are starting to want to know some answers to the road closure up there, both on our side and on the Minnesota side. So we closed it in February. We gave our consultant that was on the job 4 additional tasks. One was to do traffic analysis with the bridge closed. How is that impacting 10th Street and the residents along there? How is it going to impact University? So they've got that completed. We've got the road as you lead up to the bridge, probably 600 to 800 feet from the bridge. It's been sliding slowly into the river. So we wanted to look at not only the bridge, but also the road. We got 2 problems, but so we wanted the road to be looked at. They're looking at that now. Braun Intertech's going to be out there doing some soil borings. So that'll be the report on that will be done in September. And then we're going to go out with a pretty cool public survey, online survey to get feedback from folks up here. We want to target everybody living north of 19th Avenue North, and really the city as a whole. But we're going to get postcards out to people on both sides of the river. That'll be coming up in the next couple of weeks. And the last one is the consultant just laying out a couple of bridge options. One to keep it at the elevation it's at, and another one is to think like people do outside the Red River Valley and get bridges that actually never get wet.
But I think the important thing you have here tonight, Jeremy, is people have to give us input. I think as commissioners, we received 1 or 2 emails, but we haven't received a lot. So it'd be really important on that part where you say, please have the public weigh in now, because that'll be helpful.
Certainly. So the game plan, everybody wants to know what the game plan is. So we're going to get our consultant's going to get their things completed. And what we want to do is, since this is a joint project with Clay County, we want to have a brown bag meeting with you guys, Moorhead City Council, because it is their city, and the Clay County board in early October to talk about what I just talked about, and hopefully have a game plan for what we're going to do with the bridge. So with that concludes.
Questions of Jeremy? Any questions of Brenda? Thank you. We'll now go to a COVID-19 update. Desi Fleming, I think she's online.
I am. Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. I was asked by Commissioner Strand to provide an update on the COVID-19 situation. So I'm sure many of you have seen the national news around the increasing COVID cases and hospitalizations, primarily a result of the Delta variant. The CDC director has termed it a pandemic of the unvaccinated, as the majority of new cases from this variant are in the unvaccinated population. This Delta variant is significantly more contagious with increased severity. Also with this variant, it's vital to complete a vaccine series, either one shot for the Johnson & Johnson vaccine or 2 shots for the Moderna or Pfizer vaccines. For the 2-dose vaccines, it's estimated that 1 dose of vaccine has only a 33% efficacy against the variant. So the full 2-dose vaccine series requires the 2nd dose to achieve optimal protection. In North Dakota, variants are not disclosed by county, only statewide. And currently there have been around 25 cases of the Delta variant identified. There's currently 264 active COVID cases within the state, with 32 of those in Cass County. Western counties such as Burley and Ward are seeing close to double our active cases with lower overall vaccination rates. Hospitalizations are fairly steady. We have had 213 individuals die from COVID in Cass County. Vaccination efforts continue to be a priority within our area. There are 74 providers in Cass County able to provide vaccine to the public. Vaccine coverage for our county is the highest in the state, but in light of the increased cases we are seeing across the nation, we have a ways to go. We encourage anyone 12 and over that is eligible to consider vaccination. For our 12 to 18-year-olds in Cass County, we are at a 30% first dose coverage rate. For 18 to 64-year-olds, we're at a 56% rate. 65 to 74-year-olds, we're at a 75% rate. And the 75 plus demographic is at 76% first dose coverage rate. The Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices has studied and reviewed the benefits versus harm of the COVID vaccines and overwhelmingly have determined that the vaccine benefits far outweigh the drawbacks for all eligible age groups. Although numbers are not increasing rapidly, we do continue to see a slow climb in vaccine uptake. We also continue to work on messaging and identifying gaps and opportunities for vaccine efforts. Fargo Cass Public Health and our community partners continue to provide opportunities for vaccination. Fargo Cass Public Health provides a walk-in clinic on Tuesdays from noon to 6 p.m. for COVID vaccine, as well as appointments on Monday, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. We also continue to do mobile missions for homebound individuals and the Cass County Jail, and work collaboratively with our community partners to meet other community vaccination requests. As for our other pandemic response activities, we continue to support COVID testing and quarantine and isolation for those experiencing homelessness. Due to lower case numbers, we will be transitioning contact tracing efforts to the state team to carry out this function at the end of July. In the event we see an increase in cases in the fall, we will reevaluate if we need to handle this activity again at the local level. That's my update. I would be happy to entertain any questions.
Commissioner Strand, any questions?
Thank you, Mayor. And Desi, thank you for joining us with this update. I'm guessing that a lot of us are very concerned about what happens if things continue to get worse. And the benefit of being here in the upper Midwest is we kind of, it seems to have a lag effect before things get to us. So I think it's important that we keep our finger on the pulse of what's happening, but it's also important that we be prepared to act if it's needed in the future. It's somewhat deja vu-ish, you know, where we're going, and let's just hope that we don't have to trigger any actions, but we need to be prepared to if that's what's called upon us to do. And if the variants continue to go, and here in eastern North Dakota, we got more vaccinated people than western North Dakota, but it's all of us. So this update's important. The most important thing is we just keep this on our radar, be paying attention to what's happening around the world and the country, and be prepared to act locally if we need, when we're needed to.
Commissioner Preston?
Desi, do you know if the state is doing more of the genetic sequencing so we know exactly how many are Delta variant?
Yeah, I mean, they do sequence the tests that they have. The problem is, you know, testing numbers are down as well. And so there's a certain percentage that they do that they send to the CDC. They also look at certain risk factors about the other tests, and they do sequencing on those. So they do a significant amount. It's just with testing numbers down, there aren't as many opportunities to do that.
Okay, so it might be higher than what we know. Yeah,
absolutely.
Thank you, Desi. Appreciate the report. Item 37, request for a new alcoholic beverage license classification. Ellen Wall and Steve Sprague to explain.
Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. I'm going to introduce you to Ellen Wall. She's going to go up and make a presentation. But while she's going up, I'd like to explain how we got to this point. And Ellen came to Commissioner Pepcorn and myself and indicated she had this business concept. And anytime somebody comes, we try to see if we have a liquor license that will fit with what they want to do. And in this case, there were just too many things that were unique about this business. And so we did not find a biz or an alcohol license that fit exactly what it was that she wanted to do. And so we worked with her on putting together some ideas on how this would work out. And so she's here to kind of show you what it is that she's got.
Thank you, Steve. I appreciate it. My name is Ellen Wall, and then I'm here with my boss as well, Ramon Sosa. He is the owner of Maxwell's out in West Fargo. So we've been working on a concept for the old VIP room located in the Block 6 building the DeLandrecy building, if you're familiar with that, right off of Maine. And we are here today. Let me just pull up our PowerPoint. So the business concept is going to be a venue space, and we are with the name Cellar 624, a venue on Main. Our proposal today is for an on-off sale wine license for event use only. So the plans for the 624 Main Avenue location is we are approaching it with an educational approach. We want to do wine events with classes offered to restaurants and retailers in the area. Also expanding wine knowledge throughout tastings, offering introductory level wine tasting classes for beginners, and experienced wine connoisseur pairing events as well. Steve and I worked on this a bit, and then he and I came up with the concept of a taste and take approach, and we would really like to offer that in the educational approach as well, just being able to, hey, come try this, educate on it, educate on the wine, and then also be able to potentially purchase the wine and take a bottle home with you. So, and Ramon and I have been working on an extensive wine list that's not offered at your generic retail locations. This would offer a new understanding for wines, and we'd be able to share our passion with it as well. So the venue space would also be open for private events when we are not utilizing it for this event only with the wine. So corporate events, business, weddings, special events, and food will be catered in. Why current liquor licenses will not work. There is not a concept similar to this that exists. We are a boutique event space specifically geared towards the atmosphere surrounding the wine community. And there is no on or off sale license for wine currently, or specifically for wine. So we'd be working on parameters for this. It'd be event only, food sales with the wine pairing, and then again, an extensive wine list not offered at your generic retail locations. So I'd like to go into an example wine event, and Ramon will pitch in here. So for example, we'd have an event and have pre-sale ticketed and offer anywhere from 5 bottles of wine to sample, about 1 to 2 ounces per sample, and that would be about 2 glasses of wine per an event. It would be paired with food, specifically charcuterie boards, something go along with the wine. And then it would be a wine presentation in person or virtual. Ramon has a lot of partnerships out in Napa. And then it would be customized to wine region and vineyards depending on which event we're going towards there. And then options to purchase sampled wine at the end. So I will be showing some architectural renderings here as well. So I wanted to kind of give a little flashback of the Block 6 building. The picture on the left is actually before the building was constructed. There's still a field. I believe there's the railroad station there now. And there's construction going on as well with the construction update too on Main there. The second picture is Block 6. It's a side view. I personally do not even recognize the building as this. And then the third one is a more current view looking from Main towards the building. So, and here is a 360 rendering of what will be done with the space. we will have a wine sampling room in up to the left here. So that will have a table that will seat about 10 people. The exterior of the building will be remodeled and have a glass storefront with wine on display. So when you walk down into the lower level where the VIP room was previously, you'll see the wine on display. And then coming in here will be an event space. We've also, the ceiling in there, we are bringing it back to its original state. So it's quite beautiful. We really are excited about that, as well as the original brick to the building too. There's a back space here that is not shown, but it will also be an extended portion to the event space to hold more capacity, and a bar area as well. So I'd like to go back to the example wine event here though, and allow Ramon to expand on that.
Hi, good evening, everybody. I'm Ramon, wine director, manager, and owner of the restaurant Maxwell's in West Fargo. So the purpose of this is just to not only have wine tastings, wine events, but also at the same time to offer wine classes with certifications for the people that we work in this community. And I'm just going to make an example. We get a lot of tourism, right, in the Fargo the Fargo Moorhead, West Fargo area. And in my personal perspective, we need to raise a little bit more our quality with the standards on service, and that includes also wine service. So these wine classes will be with certifications where they're going to know pretty much everything about wine and everything that includes pretty much on the restaurant service.
So we are, our motion today is to move forward with creating a license for this. We are very excited to, again, share our passion with wine and also breathe some life into a space downtown that has been a little forgotten recently. So we're very excited working with our local architect and then also other local contractors to get this done. So,
Steve, I'm a little confused. Normally you go liquor control, they'd recommend a license. Why are we doing it this way?
So what we're looking for is the city commission to direct the city attorney to create the license, and then we would work with the applicant to get the license that we're looking for. It would go back to liquor control to make sure the parameters are where everybody is comfortable, and then go through the normal process of receive and file first reading, second reading.
Do I have a motion? Commissioner Pipcorn?
Mr. Chair, I'll make the motion. I have a question for Steve. Steve, I got an email, and I think you did too. There were some concerns about the license and following the right parameters. Can you talk on, was that addressed?
Sure. So I think the concern was Ramon's wife, I believe, is involved in the wine distribution business. And in the laws, you can either be a manufacturer, a distributor, or a retailer. And so we did reach out to clarify that she is not involved in any of the retail operations, just in the distribution part of the business.
Commissioner Preston?
So Steve?
Just wait, I'm waiting on a second. I was hoping you were seconding.
Oh, sorry.
Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
A second? Now you can make a comment then.
It's a question, actually. So Steve, what number of classification of licenses is this going to be?
Oh, gosh.
Like, how many do we have?
I can't, I wasn't prepared for that answer. I'm not sure.
It's over 30, I think, maybe closer to 40. Anyway, my point is, beyond A's, ABs, and Bs, when you're talking hard liquor, I would say we need to look for a solution that is simpler than making a separate classification for every new request that's coming forward. There's a lot of entrepreneurial approaches, and this one I love. I mean, I think it's going to be great. But these people shouldn't have to go through a whole new classification every single time. So looking at some kind of solution that would allow for a more flexibility administratively. And Eric, I'm looking at you. instead of making classifications for one case as it comes before us, can't we do a larger, broader category?
All I can say is that's certainly been tried, I think, a few times in the last 20-some years. Nancy has been more deeply involved in it than I have, but yeah, I mean, one would think that that could be the case, but there are a lot of different interests that come into play, and I think that's made things somewhat complicated.
So the downfall was that there's a lot of interests that come into play?
Yeah,
or-
well, you're changing the rules in an established industry, and just there may be other reasons too that I'm not bearing in mind. But again, all I can say is we might have to dust off some of the previous attempts and take a look at those and see why they failed. Because there've been some attempts to try and simplify it or change it in one way or another for the overall good, and it just there's always been some stumbling blocks, I think.
There's been multiple attempts to change the amount of complexity there is, but it seems it never gets enough impetus to get passed to the commission. It seems like we never go to that extent. Joe Bergam has some great ideas about little wine areas and little things like this, entrepreneurs and such, and it just seems that liquor control never went forward on any of that. Commissioner Gary.
Or you're 100% right, and I love the idea.
Thank
It's
you.
easy. Other cities have done it. A, B, C, alcohol, beer, and wine, on and off sale. The end. So we have over 30 licenses, well over 30. We could have 6, right? A, B, C, on and off. But we demand that we have this complex system where we have to create new licenses all the time. You know, JL Beers and Vinyl Taco had to create a whole new license just to sell beer there. And then we created 2 licenses, and the same guy owned them. And then when someone else tried to create a beer bar elsewhere in downtown, he was denied that license. So it is a mafia. The people who own the licenses don't want more. So the reason we don't have the ABC on and off sale is because the people in charge of this commission, who are not sitting here, don't want more licenses. So yes, I totally agree we should create this.
Thank
But
you.
at the same time, we need to fix our system, which is completely broken. And 7 years ago, I asked for that to happen. And 1 year ago, not even 6 months ago, I was kicked off that board for suggesting they should have less power.
Any other comments or discussion? Roll call vote.
Pepcorn?
Aye.
Preston?
Aye.
Garrick?
Yes.
Strand? Mahoney?
Yes. 38, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Receive and
Thank you for your
file
time.
the Brownfield Assessment Report for Mid-America Steel Site. Nicole Crutchfield to explain.
See if someone. There you go. Good evening. Yes, we are in front of you tonight. We have a brief presentation from our consultant, Scott Harmstead with SRF. As a requirement of our EPA Brownfield Assessment Grant, which we received 4 years ago, we hired SRF for this last phase of cleanup planning at the Mid-America Steel site. This is basically concluding our Phase 2 environmental assessment and then bringing that back out, the results of that back out to the public for public discussion. We had a couple open houses and analysis by Scott and SRF and Braun Intertech, and I'll turn it over to Scott to do a brief presentation and answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Nicole. Yeah, Scott Harmstead, a planner with SRF Consulting. So I'm going to provide a brief overview here for you of this last phase. Oh, I cannot advance, so
Okay.
perfect. Thank you. So really just the goals of this piece, this assessment is really to analyze the site, what are the constraints and opportunities related to it, and what are some of the land use options related to the site as well. Part of that, as Nicole said, there were 2 open houses and a number of 3 stakeholder focused meetings, and some of your commissioners were part of that. Engagement, I'll just highlight that really quick. The next slide. just the stakeholder engagement. These are all the different folks that were participated in those meetings. Next slide. Two public open houses. We had about 20 attendees at each. A lot of great questions and comments. The news was all over this. There was, I think, at least one article in the forum, and then a couple of news outlets has also got it on TV. An overview of the report. Those are just the main sections. I'd refer you to the report. It's quite extensive, but those are all the different sections. In terms of the recommendations in there, I'll just highlight, really I want to highlight the first two. This option one probably had the most public backing to it generally and stakeholder backing to it, but the most usable part of the site is the northwest part of the site, really at the intersection of 2nd Street and NP Avenue. You have a roughly 3.94 acres of usable space there once you include the future levee that would be going through the site. So the idea there would be a public use, maybe a public entertainment use. A lot of ideas have been bounced around, such as Performing Arts Center has been discussed before. Could be a children's museum, science center, something like that. Something as an anchor to downtown, an attraction to the city. And I'll note as well, of course, along the eastern side of the site, the floodway, can't really do anything vertically there. Very limited, of course, because of the floodway restrictions. So it would have to be park open space use, but still a lot of good ideas generated for that area, such as an open amphitheater, an open market space for like a farmer's market, botanical garden, a lot of good ideas. Then I'll also touch on this other option is for a vertical mixed use. Again, primarily focused towards NP Avenue and 2nd Street intersection, but just more of your typical downtown mixed use with some type of commercial bottom floor and residential above. Just to note though, commercial would be pretty limited, especially retail out here, because you just don't have the foot traffic, of course, that you do towards Broadway. But residential could be quite attractive. There's a lot of feedback about that. And especially the views you could get of the Red River and the Greenway there especially. So, and I also want to mention there's little on the southwest corner of the site, sandwiched between Main Avenue and the railway, BNSF Railway. You do have about an acre of land that could be used. The problem there is access is not great. You can only get there really, vehicular access is limited from Main Avenue, and it's only a right-in, right-out access. So you can't do much there. You could build something, but I'm not sure it's all too attractive to a developer. The preferred use might be more towards a parking lot to get access to the rest of the site or to the river, or some type of open space use. So we'll go through these other options here. These are just other options. They didn't have as much support. But I just wanted to highlight some of the ideas again for that northwest portion. Again, housing, vertical mixed use, some type of public entertainment facility gained the most support through the analysis and the input. Public park space, again, some ideas here of pictures. Again, I just talked through some of those, but a great opportunity that the Park District expressed some support for, at least during those meetings. So the next steps, well, actually the first one here is already happening. The demolition has already begun. So that's great. A good time to do it as well with steel prices being very high. So the city did save some money on that, as I understand it. But after that, it would be good to get to do an Alta Survey, which is a detailed topographic survey, which also documents all of the easements on that site. It's a pretty complex set of easements there between what's going on with the railway and different access pieces as well, and utilities on site. And then a little bit more detailed evaluation of those land use options and what the city would truly prioritize on that site. And then last but not least, part of this, I didn't mention this, is the environmental remediation part. So Brown Intertech was on our team, and they do have suggestions along with those land use options to how to deal with that. And so there's going to have to be some more environmental remediation that'll have to happen to get to what's called a no further action from the EPA. to give development the green light on this piece of land. But with that, I'll give you the last slide here. If we could go to the last slide. That's the site over 100 years ago, and it used to be residential. Those are homes, but it's really the birthplace of Fargo along the river, if you were not aware. So a lot of history too on the site to connect it to. So with that, we'll take any questions you might have.
So Nicole, what's the suggested motion?
Receive and file.
Okay. Can
So
I have a
moved.
motion?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion or questions? Scott? Roll call vote.
Preston?
Aye.
Gehrig?
Yes.
Pepcorn?
Aye.
Strand?
Yes.
Mahoney?
Aye. Item 39, recommendation to adopt resolution approving the 2021-2022 Wildlife Management Program. Chief Zabowski to explain. I think you had more time, didn't you, Tony, till September?
We'll see.
Oh, okay.
Good evening, Commissioners. Really more of an update. The resolution is just to keep the wildlife management program in place while the study committee completes its work and does a report back to you on September 7th. So the first meeting of the study group is set for August 9th. We've got some good participation and interested parties, so I think we'll have some good options to bring forward for September. But again, following up on the direction from the June 28th meeting, we'll keep the management program going forward, allowing for any future study group recommendations to take place yet during the 21-22 management year, if approved by the commission.
Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion or questions of the chief? Roll call vote, please.
Preston?
Aye.
Pepcorn?
Aye.
Gehrig?
Yes.
Strand?
Yes.
Mahoney?
Aye. Recommendation to adopt resolution authorizing the sale of Island Park parking ramp on 500 Main Avenue. Jim Gilmore to explain.
Bill Bank has been looking at several different locations in the downtown to locate their headquarters over the past several years. I think in part because of the availability of the Island Park ramp, they have entered into a purchase agreement to acquire the Bank of the West building. That building has about 100,000 square feet. They're proposing to completely rebuild it from the exterior to the interior. So they're interested in acquiring our parking ramp, the city parking ramp, to ensure that they have enough parking for this building. The Bank of the West building has about 150 parking spots on site. Bell expects to have at least 250 and maybe up to 350 to 400 employees in the building when it's fully occupied. There's really only 3 tenants in the building now, with probably less than 30 people working in that building. The Island Park ramp was constructed by the city of Fargo 20 years ago. Structurally, it's still in, I think, very good condition. There's some security cameras that need to be upgraded. That's the only, probably significant improvement that they'd have to make. There's 347 parking spots. We only have 28 rented out full-time, paying the full monthly rate. There's another 40-some that the Y rents kind of on a part-time basis. They have a group of people that park there, but they're never there all at once. Our June parking revenue was $3,079. Historically, we've had a lot more use in the ramp. There used to be a lot of tenants in the Wells Fargo building, as well in the Bank of the West. Typically, we'd have 250 to even up to 400 people renting parking spots in that facility. There's an interest in this ramp. In order to sell it, we have to go through this process, sort of a surplus property type process, and that's what's before you today, this resolution. In talking to Bill Bank, how we came up with the value, we were looking at some recent studies that in 2020, the average cost of building a parking stall was about, in a ramp, was about $22,500. Kind of the median, if you add engineering and architecture to that, is closer to about $25,000 with soft costs. So how we came up with the $9.5 million, was that's 25,000 times 347, plus the cost of the land that we purchased last year is 9.5 million. So essentially, we'd be getting, I think, very close to replacement cost on it. I think it's a good value for the city. You know, I can talk to both Interstate Parking and Walker Consultants. They feel that would be, you know, a good price for the city to sell the ramp for. The Finance Committee has looked at this and has recommended approval of the resolution. If you adopt this resolution, we would advertise several times in August with proposals due in September. You know, another party could also propose to acquire the facility. We're asking, though, that anyone who would acquire it would be like Bell and bring in at least 250 jobs into the downtown. We've been working with the 501 Main Avenue project. They're still hopeful to build that. We would include a condition that they would make available up to 100 parking spots for that facility, as well as 25 to 50 parking spots for the people that currently park in there. There's a handful of downtown residents and a architecture firm on Main Avenue that uses the facility. Bell is comfortable with that. They're also comfortable with it still being free parking in the evening and on weekends. So there would still be some public use of the facility. People would have access to it if they were attending an event in Island Park on a weekend. I'd be happy to answer any questions on this. I think it's
Any questions, Gilmore?
Mr. Chairman, so
Commissioner Pipcorn.
actually, Jim and I don't have a question. We were going to do a little bit of lobbying. So the 9.5 million, I believe, is planned on going back to the general fund. And our lobbying effort is going to be that you put that 9.5 billion and let the parking commission continue to do other projects. Because if this goes back into the general fund, then we're not going to have any finances to do any new ones. And even though parking garages might not seem very glamorous, these corporate headquarters that come down here, that's the first question they ask is, where's our parking? And so it's a critical part of it. And so I don't know if we can decide that tonight, but we have lots of other projects coming. And if you want to keep them coming, we have to have some money. That's the bottom line. So, but other than that, if it's time for the motion, I'll make the motion. Thank you.
Is there a second?
Second.
Preston, second. Any discussion? Commissioner Gary?
How long was the incentive on this property?
the tax increment financing district. This particular property actually was not in the tax increment district. The Wells Fargo building and the Dakota Bank building were in the tax increment financing district.
Okay.
Okay, and I guess the only incentive I think Bell may apply for is the remodeling exemption. It's outside of the Renaissance zone, and so they're not asking for that
Okay.
or any pilot incentive.
Any other questions? Roll call vote.
Mayor, I'm just,
Oh, Commissioner Strand.
just help me understand, Jim, how much has the public invested in this parking ramp?
The city constructed it for $4.5 million in 2000, and we acquired the land for, I believe, $875,000 last year. The parking ramp was paid for with a combination of three sources. One, the people who paid to park there provided money for bonds. Secondly, tax increment financing. Third, there was a special assessment district where Norwest Bank and Community First Bank were paying for a portion of paying off that debt. So there was no general fund money went into the facility.
Okay. Any follow-up, John?
No, that's
Okay.
adequate.
Roll call vote, please.
Pepcorn?
Aye.
Preston?
Aye.
Garrick?
Yes.
Strand?
Yes.
Mahoney?
Aye. Letter from city attorney regarding his opinion on the city's term limits ordinance. Eric Johnson to explain.
Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. Eric Johnson, City Attorney for Fargo. You have in your packet my written opinion. You'd requested it at the last meeting, July 12th. I'd given an opinion to Mayor Mahoney some 4 years ago, and subsequently he had looked into it and talked to Howard Swanson from Grand Forks, and then also Tammy Norgard as well, who offered opinions that were at variance with my initial review. And so when Ms. Norgard presented her analysis at the last meeting, you asked for my opinion. Put some time into laying out. I mean, my analysis really wasn't any different, but I laid it out in quite considerable detail for your benefit. A little spills over into the 16th page. And I'm not going to try and explain all of that to you tonight. For one thing, it's getting to be a long meeting, so I will try to summarize this as best I can, just so you have it in mind anyway. And I'm not really here to try and argue about the opinion one way or the other, but certainly here to answer any questions you have. And then, again, just to provide an explanation. And then, if you like, to provide you with some options for a path forward. Obviously, this will be an issue that impacts the next city election next June. So anyways, I'll give you a brief explanation, not intended at all to replace the detailed analysis that's in that written opinion. So I will certainly omit different arguments and different points of analysis, but I'll try and give you a little bit of a substance of it. This is the ordinance itself. I won't read it aloud, but has a basic term limit for members of the city commission, whether you're mayor or city commissioner, of 3 successive 4-year terms. And then there are sort of 4 exceptions or clarifications or conditions, as you might want to, however you might want to describe it. And again, as with a number of laws that get enacted, not always do the facts roll out as one might expect. And I think that's what we're dealing with here, where then Commissioner Mahoney gets in on under an initial partial term. That's under that subsection A there, where you have a member elected to a term of less than 4 years as a result of a vacancy on the board. They're eligible to serve 3 additional 4-year terms. That's what it says. And when Thomas Lane was a city commissioner back in the early 2000s, had to leave town with a job, and that created the vacancy. And there was a partial term of something less than a year. And Mayor Mahoney was at that time running for a commission and was successful. So that's where that provision came into play. Commissioner Gehrig is in the same situation, being elected in a special election in April of 2015 for an initial term of less than 4 years. What we're dealing with, of course, here is a second event that occurs sort of in the middle of somebody's existing presence as a member of the city commission. And so that's what kind of causes, you might say, a confusion. You have a base term of 3 4-year terms. That's the term limit. So what does it mean when there's references to a partial term created by a vacancy? What exactly does that mean? And if you get a partial term created by a vacancy, what does 3 additional 4-year terms mean? Does that mean we already have a base of 3? Do we get another 3? That's where the language becomes less than clear. Then there's this idea of a waiting period that if once you run into 3 successive 4-year terms, you have to sort of wait at least 2 years for another regular election. That's the waiting period language. And what's omitted from this particular list is, of course, the idea that where one serves as a combination over your span of time as a member of the commission, as a mayor and a commissioner, then 3 years kind of is converted to 4 years. Again, I won't get into the different interpretations. I'll just focus on the opinion that I developed, and that I kind of called it the commission member model. In other words, when you look at the ordinance, it is focusing upon people being members of the city commission. So whether you start as a mayor and finish as a commissioner, whether you start as a mayor and end as a mayor, any one of those combinations, start as a commissioner and convert to a mayor, you're a member of the city commission, and that's the terminology that's used in this ordinance. And if so, the base is a 3 4-year term limit. And I just took the same ordinance, 2-0106, and sort of highlighted that perspective of we're talking about people who are a member of the commission, and that's an important perspective for purposes of my interpretation. So if you read the ordinance in its entirety, and I might stop and point out that there are North Dakota statutes and cases that interpret those statutes that sort of create a structure for interpreting statutes and ordinances. I'm not going to go through those steps or the rules that are applicable to it, other than you heard a little bit about it from Ms. Norgard, where you look at the plain and ordinary language. That's sort of the starting point, and then there's further steps that we'll check in on in a little bit. So you read the ordinance without sort of distinguishing the different offices. Mayor is the same as a commissioner for purposes of reading this, with sort of one exception. And that's despite the fact that in a particular 4-year term, that member might be a commissioner, then an acting mayor, acting in the capacity as a mayor, and then an elected mayor. But nevertheless, during a single 4-year term, they are still always a member of the commission. And that's the perspective that I used in developing my opinion. And as a result of that, Mayor Mahoney is currently in his 4th 4-year term, and they're listed on this slide. So his first term, so the June 2014 to 2018 term was, in my interpretation, the way the ordinance reads in its entirety, was a single 4-year term, even though we know that there was a partial term created. But still, as a member, he was there continuously from 2014, June of 2014 to June 2018. And the ordinance itself really only treats members differently.
Commissioner Garrick, just a quick question. Was he continuous from 14 to 18?
Yes. Yes.
You didn't resign to run for mayor?
I resigned.
Yes. Okay. Well, let me get to that. It's the bottom bullet point here. So the members are really treated, it's always a member, but there is a different treatment, and that's when a commissioner-mayor combination occurs. In other words, during someone's continuous service on the city commission, they might start as a mayor, and I don't know if we've ever heard this, but they might flip down to a city commissioner to finish out 4 terms, or the case we have here where someone starts as a commissioner and converts to a mayor by election. So in that case, you really added, you get the added 4th successive term of 4 years. So let me stop and talk about the resignation requirement. The resignation requirement wasn't in place when this ordinance was enacted in 1992. It came along later, and it required that if somebody was going to do exactly what Mayor Mahoney did, which was to run for a mayoral office once they're commissioner, they would have to resign first. According to the Home Rule Charter, the resignation would take effect 2 weeks later. And in the materials I provided, Mayor Mahoney's resignation did say that, taking effect 2 weeks later. And the reason for that particular provision, the 2 week later aspect, is that 2 weeks later happens to be when a person takes office, when they're elected. And so Commissioner Garrick is, I think, maybe the starting point for the analysis. As a result of Commissioner Mahoney resigning in January 2015 as city commissioner, doesn't take effect until after the election, but as a result of that resignation, that allowed our city auditor to advertise an opening for the seat he was going to be vacating. And so that allowed an election to occur in the same special election. You're filling the vacant mayoral spot, and then now the vacant commission spot that's left behind because that commissioner decided to run for mayor. In the end, Commissioner Mahoney and Acting Mayor Mahoney was successful in that special election, April 28th of 2015, as was Commissioner Garrick. Commissioner Garrick took office on 2 weeks later, on May 12th, and that's also the day that Commissioner Mahoney's elected mayoral position commenced. And so, yes, Mayor Mahoney did resign. It was effective 2 weeks after the election, but he was always serving as a member of the city commission throughout that process. Since that time, as you know, also on the ballot for the April 2015 special election was a question to the voters whether to amend the Home Rule Charter to remove that resignation requirement, and the voters approved the removal, so we no longer have that in place. The effect of that, not really relevant to our conversation, but the effect of that would mean then that if somebody doesn't resign, if they're successful in advancing to the position of mayor, for example, you might have to have a special election within a few months to fill the now vacant commission spot left behind. That was one of the advantages of the resignation requirement, is to avoid the possibility of a second special election. Again, this still focusing on the opinion I developed. If one reads the term limits ordinance and attempts to give meaning to the ordinance in its entirety, the result is that Mayor Mahoney has been a member of the City Commission since he was initially elected in September 2005 without interruption. Certainly his first term, that 8-9 months, partial term doesn't count as a 4-year term. He gets 3 additional 4-year terms. Served the entire 4-year term of June 2014 to 2018 as a member of the commission, and thus, again, going back to that slide that lists the 4 terms, he was elected in June 2018 to his 4th 4-year term as a member of the city commission and not eligible for a 5th 4-year term. Having said that, as I've already mentioned and you heard last week, there are arguments that are at odds with the interpretation I've provided. The general idea is if you have a statute or an ordinance where there are sort of plausible interpretations, more than one plausible interpretation or some kind of doubtful meaning, then that can be deemed to be ambiguous. And so far, prior to finding an ambiguity, our job in interpreting statutes is to look at the words on the page, not to try and figure out what we think people meant, what the words meant, looking at the words alone. In my opinion, my actual opinion is that my interpretation does stand on a reasonable interpretation of the words itself, but I also am willing to recognize that there is an argument. I don't completely discount the logic and the merit of the arguments that have been made by Mr. Swanson and Ms. Norgard, and I'm willing to acknowledge that there is an ambiguity there. What that does is then allow the people interpreting the statute or ordinance to look at extrinsic evidence outside the words, and one of those pieces of extrinsic evidence would be to look at the legislative history. In our case, it would be the testimony or the conversation contained in the minutes of the 1992 meeting, or meetings, I should say, starting in June 1st of 1992 and a series of meetings thereafter. And in my letter, I've highlighted testimony that was offered by then Commissioner Furness, who made this presentation sort of shortly after he was elected. As you can see, even Commissioner Preston, who was then a city commissioner as well, also elected somewhat recently at that time, she offered the idea of having the opportunity for a 4th successive 4-year term if one is going to be both a commissioner and a mayor, to give that person an added opportunity to serve as both commissioner and mayor. I won't go over all that testimony at all, but refer you to that. But in my opinion, when you look at that testimony, it supports the analysis that I've made. Then the city commissioner, then the city attorney, Wayne Solberg, explained when he brought back the initial draft, this whole idea that a member is, under the city ordinances and Home Rule Charter, both mayor and city commissioner are members, and that became sort of the focal point of how he drafted this. So in any event, I leave it to you to read that testimony, the minutes from those meetings in 1992, again, extracted in my letter, and then also in the appendix. The entirety of the minutes for those meetings are contained in that appendix.
Commissioner Garrick?
So, tough spot, Arlette. You were there. You gave testimony. You voted for it. This says that, according to Derek, you can give testimony to determine the intent of the ordinance. Would you like to give an opinion on that?
I'm not sure if it's necessarily fair to ask her now what her
Well, I
opinion
did,
is.
though.
So we can look at the minutes, or if there was a transcript back then, I'm not
But she's
not
here.
completely certain if it'd be allowed.
I mean, you've given an opinion publicly on the radio and here. I'm wondering if this needs to go to court or not.
I'm sorry, if it meets with?
To go to court or not. You know, if you were there and was the intent, I've heard different things. I've heard 16 years, that's it, you're done. Or I've heard other things with the lapses in your term, right? I'm wondering if you agree with Eric or if you agree with Tim or what, because this is going to go to the court otherwise if we don't change the ordinance. And you were there during the discussion in 1992.
I would just say that Eric's interpretation is, I think, on target with how I remember it. And I agree. That was 20-some years ago. So actually close to 30. So, just looking at the written documentation, I think is the best way to do it.
Well, the last bullet point here is, this is my opinion. I'm the city attorney, and the question is, what does it mean now that you have that? You have at least 3 opinions here, and I think it's important to recognize that while the city typically looks to me for advice and my office for advice, hopefully you take it more times than not. Staff certainly will, and there may be some analysis about that. But you do have people that are not inside the city that are interested in the election, may be thinking about running, may need to know whether they're running against an incumbent or not. And they're certainly not bound by my opinion. So it is subject to challenge. And so that's where we're left here, is just that point. I did take liberty of writing down at least a couple of considerations that occurred to me about the idea of election in June, and there being some uncertainty as to this. And you can read those for yourselves. Time frame, I think it does help. If courts are going to decide things, that takes time, and so the election cycle formally starts the 1st of January. And of course ends with the election on, usually it's June 13th or 14th. I think it's the 14th, this particular one coming up. And so there's about 5 months there. So people announce that they're intending to be a candidate, but candidacy formally starts by either getting signatures on a petition, or in Fargo, we can candidates can hand in their statement of candidacy with a $100 fee, and they become a candidate. That isn't really eligible until after the 1st of the year. So that creates a time frame that's fairly narrow. We obviously have been dealing with election confidence or lack thereof across the country, and I think that becomes an important issue. And the question is just to whether, generally speaking, it's helpful to clarify people's doubts. So those considerations seem to be warranted in this circumstance, aside from the personal issue that's we're obviously at hand here. So with that, if you have questions, or if you would like me to walk through some options, I'd be happy to do so, but I didn't want to presume to start doing that unless you are looking for help.
I think it'd be helpful. Do you have any questions? Because I think the options would be helpful.
Okay. Yeah, so I've listed 4 options here. The first is to receive and file my opinion letter. That's fairly standard protocol. It's kind of marginally a do-nothing option at this point. You might just consider it and decide further what to do later on. The second step would be to request a court interpretation. We just actually had an example of that come up last week. We don't deal with this very often, but not last week, last month, with the firearms preemption House Bill 1248 matter, where we are filing an action in court there to obtain a declaratory judgment. In this particular case, it's a variation on the same thing where it's possible to file an action in court to request an interpretation of an ordinance. How that gets structured, I mean, that's something that is up to the discretion of the court, but that is a possibility.
Commissioner Garrick.
So if we request interpretation by a judge, what does that mean? We were thinking kind of that Tim would have to sue or whatever to do that. We can just ask the judge to give us an opinion?
Yes. There is, I mean, again, the court would be authorized to give that opinion according to the declaratory judgment statute. The court also has the discretion to decline to do so. It generally becomes important if you're going to, to convince the judge to take it. Courts don't generally like to give advisory opinions, or they'd be inundated with legal questions all the time. So it is extremely helpful if there seems to be a case and controversy, in other words, a real controversy in place. And so at this stage, I'd say the election is nigh, but the idea is that you would be filing the action saying, we think this is a legitimate concern. The city has an interest in having this doubt resolved. If we don't resolve it, it'll be January 1st and an application will be made and our city auditor is going to have to figure out what to do. Those are the basic reasons. And we'd ask the litigation counsel to tee up the ball in a way that hopefully gets the court to take on the matter.
So I guess two questions. One, what are the odds that the judge will take it up? And two, is there litigation? Would you present your point and Tim's lawyer presents their point, or is it just the judge sees the plain language and makes a decision?
Yeah. I mean, I think if the city's attorneys initiated the matter, yes, they would present my letter, and I think that would speak for itself. If the court had questions about it, that we certainly could provide answers. And I think that interested parties would likely, be asked to intervene into the case and make arguments. And, I don't expect any resistance to that. If the city were to initiate this and it were just an application to the court and Mayor Mahoney wanted to intervene as a party so that he had the right to participate, I would expect, so with your permission, I would expect to stipulate to them to be able to intervene. And the same
I would
others
move
who are
option
interested.
2.
What's that? Under option
Let's
2.
finish the rest of the option, Tony. I know you're jumping.
Well, it's a motion, so I move option 2.
There's a motion. Is there a second? Being no second, let's go on with the rest of the options.
The third is to seek a citywide vote. You actually directed that at your meeting on July 12th, and so an advisory vote's already authorized. So that's an option. Presumably that was going on the ballot for the June election. So the problem with that is, of course, it won't resolve the problem for this election for Mayor Mahoney as to whether whether you decide to do something with term limits. Again, I think the notion was that would be an advisory vote. So that is already there. And then a fourth option is to the extent there's a lack of clarity in our term limits ordinance, to cure the lack of clarity in one way or the other. Change the ordinance however you would wish to do so. If you were to want to make the change to permit Mayor Mahoney to run for another term, I think the proposal and the draft ordinance that I prepared at the mayor's request would clarify this partial term so that it's consistent with the way that Ms. Norgard presented it basically 2 weeks ago. It basically says where there's a partial term in a situation like that, that partial term is not going to be counted as one of the 3 or 4 successive 4-year terms.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. President.
So, can you go back?
I don't know.
Oh, there it is, under number 3.
Yeah.
You have termed that advisory vote. What do you mean by that?
Well, at this stage, the way the motion was made 2 weeks ago, it was sort of asking the voters, do you want term limits or do you not? That doesn't really provide us with a law. If you want them to react to, the voters to react to a specific law, then we
Okay.
would need to prepare something that's precise, whether it's a home rule charter amendment or an ordinance. What is it going to look like? But that's not what, it was Commissioner Garrick's motion, I think. That's not what Commissioner Garrick's
Okay.
motion said 2 weeks ago.
So if I could just make a comment there. I mean, I supported this back in 92. So I believe in term limits. The problem that I had with it back then was that it was ordinance level. So I think it would be really wise, instead of an advisory vote, to actually have term limits written out in a ballot measure, and people will vote up or down on it. So maybe we need to revisit that part of the motion from July 12th.
We certainly have plenty of time to do so, and we can work on any kind of language you like, yes.
I think a couple of the issues you have when we go through both the dialogues is the ordinance did not anticipate a death in office. So I think when you wrote the ordinance, you weren't necessarily thinking a mayor would die in office. I think in Eric's analogy, I still had to stand for election. So when you're doing 4 years, 4 years, or 3 years, 3 years, 4 years, 4 years, 4 years, you are elected every time to a 4-year term. You are elected in front of the public, and they vote you in as a commissioner. If you vote your last term and run for mayor, you are elected at an election. I had to stand twice for an election. I had to stand for commission, and I had to stand for mayor. I could have lost. The other issue we have in our ordinance, if Arlette runs for mayor next summer and Dave Pipcorn runs for mayor, she can retain her seat. He can't. He's out. He either runs for commission or runs for mayor, but it's not, he doesn't get that quid pro quo. I can run for mayor and I don't lose my position. I think my legal advice in the ordinance I've gotten is it's an ambiguous ordinance in some ways because we never anticipated certain things. Because if I truly read the ordinance, I can be in this office for another 3 4-year terms. Total, as you put it in your argument, Eric, 7 terms. And Arlette, I'm sure the term was you never anticipated that somebody would do 7 terms, but you said 4 terms were okay. So I think I comply with the term limits if that awkward death of Denny and vote is regarded not as a complete term, just like the 205 was a partial term. It was a partial term. And to me, it's important for you all to remember, when you're elected to a term, that starts when you get elected and your first day you're sworn in until the end of that term, until you then are re-elected. Partial terms are different than anything else that we have in our area. So you do have an ordinance drafted, which takes away the ability to do 7 terms, takes away the ability to do anything other than, we disregard the partial term, and Mahoney could run for 1 more term. No more, that's it. And let the public decide. You know, if we're so confident in ourselves and we think that we're a better candidate, run for mayor. And if you win, you win. But why take away my right to run for mayor? If the ordinance is ambiguous, I think that's a disservice. Why let a judge make this decision? I think you as a commission have to decide. You have to decide what you feel in your heart is fair. And we're all conflicted, because any 4 of you could run for mayor. We're all kind of slot here. I want to run, you might want to run, you might want to run. So what's fair if we are the judge and jury on a decision that can truly affect us? And the one it truly affects is me right now. So Eric, I know that we went through this, but you also have to agree that with the ambiguity that we have, the one that fixes the terms in the ordinance is probably the best option we should have. Because you still stand, and I have an attorney who stands real strong, we both have great arguments. But if we fix the ambiguities of the ordinance, you would pass the one that you passed out.
Mr. Chair, I have a question.
Commissioner
So
Pepper.
Eric, this is my question for you. So then hypothetically, Commissioner Garrick and I, our terms are up in June, so we could resign and then that would reset our clock. Isn't that correct? If we wanted to?
Yeah, I thought a lot about that question, and I know that you asked it 2 weeks ago. The idea of somebody resigning 2 weeks before the election or a month before the election or something like that, it does create a rather uncomfortable situation. And I'm really, I mean, I kind of decided not to respond to that question.
Well, I'll answer it for you. We could do that. Both Tony and I could do that, and that would reset our clock. So then we would be able to. And to me, the rules, there is no question here. It's 3 4-year terms. That's it. There is no ambiguity. And so follow the rules. Nobody's above the rules. Follow the rules. They're black and white. You have a conflict of interest. That's it. I mean, you can see what it says. And so if we want to, we can play the game, but then that deems what they voted on irrelevant. Then the term limits thing is no longer, because we could all game it all the way along. So that's to me, the essence of it is very clear. And if you want to play the game, but then we can all play the game, but then there's no more term limits. And so to me, follow the rules. Nobody's above the rules.
Mr. Gehrig.
I want to be very clear. I am not running for mayor, so I have no dog in this fight. So in my mind, there are 3 options. You either change the law, you delete it, or you get an opinion. And I see no harm in asking for an opinion. Asking a judge to tell us what he sees as the intent and all those things. Arlette can go and testify. You go, testify. I don't see a problem with that. That is the least harm I can think of right now. But right now we're arguing, and at some point, if we say Tim can't run, he's going to sue the city. Then it's going to go to court anyway. So he is running. So what's the fastest way to get through this? Let's just get an opinion. I don't think anyone here wants to change the law today. I'm not going to move for that, because I wasn't there. Only Arlette was there, and she declined to give an opinion. So let's get an opinion from a judge. Let's move forward. If you, like you said, Tim, if you're the best, run and beat Tim Mahoney. That's just fine with me. I think you should run. I think you have a good argument. I want to see what a judge says. So I want someone else to make the motion that I made that failed, so that we can move forward with this.
Mr. Strand.
Thank you, Mayor. I think one thing we can all agree on is it's time to get this resolved proactively and not kick the can down the road and have other problems that are a consequence of not getting it resolved. The ambiguity, the questions, the interpretations, it's just leaving us all. And I'm guessing the reality is this group here might not give the most objective vote for the greater good if we're potentially, in fact, impacted ourselves, or running or not running, or wanting to run or not. It's a mess. So I came into tonight's meeting with the understanding, one thing my understanding is as an elected official, we're pretty much obligated to follow our legal counsel. I also came here with the understanding and the knowledge that what do we do when January comes around? If we don't address it and Mayor Mahoney files, that might, he goes to the auditor and the auditor says, yes or no, you cannot file or you can file. That might trigger litigation. If the auditor says, yes, you can file, then another candidate in town might sue us saying they didn't have the right to run. And that puts us into the cycle of the race where we're all of a sudden in court anyway. My best judgment was to have us listen to our legal counsel and receive and file it, but I don't think that's for the public's best interest. I think the public's best interest is to somehow get on the high road, to have somebody who's not biased render an opinion legally, and get our heads out of this, because we can't be clear if it's affecting us personally. So I'm inclined to support Commissioner Gehrig's approach that we and I don't like spending taxpayer money. I think we need to resolve this before January. We have to. And I don't know another way to do that. So that's where I'm at.
Further discussion?
Commissioner Gehrig, why don't you make your motion again?
Am I allowed to do it again?
Certainly.
I move number 2.
I'll second it.
Second. Discussion? Roll call vote.
Gehrig?
Yes.
Strand,
Yes.
Pepcorn,
No,
Preston,
Yes.
Mahoney,
No. Request from Commissioner Preston to develop a rental licensure program.
Yeah, just to keep this real brief, the core neighborhood plan that has just been adopted by us not too awfully long ago had indicated a concern from all of the core neighborhoods really about rental housing. And it's mostly related to those absentee owner rental homes that have probably most oftentimes been converted from single-family homes. The plan, the consultant suggests a rental licensure program. And granted, this is only one strategy of a number of strategies to try to support the core neighborhoods. So what I'm suggesting here is that the suggested motion being to direct staff in coordination with the city attorney's office to further develop a framework for the creation of a rental licensure program and to report the next steps to the city commission within the next 6 months. And I would move that motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion.
Mr. Chair, so this is a great opportunity for contrast. Capitalism versus leftists. Capitalism, if you're a renter and you have a bad landlord, you go to a different place. With a leftist, what do? You add bureaucracy. And let me ask you a question. If you're a renter, do you think your rent's going to go up or down with a new government program? What do you think? The landlords are going to have to pay a fee. Do you think they're going to pay the fee and lower your rent? Hell no. They're going to pass that on to you. So what you're doing is paying for the government to babysit for you. Instead of in the free market, what you do is if you have a crappy landlord, you go someplace else. We have excellent landlords. We have terrible landlords. But you know what you get to do? In a free country, you get to choose. Or you get to add more government. Let's see, we'd have to have more planning staff to do, and the fees, what's that going to be? So anyway, I just think it's awesome. It's a great opportunity to see a government solution or the individual solution. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
It's not public, Don. I'm sorry. Commissioner Gary.
So sort of in the same vein. So I was a property owner. I owned a number of apartment complexes. When you add bureaucracy, like you're saying, Dave, it adds cost. You have to prove certain things. You have to do this, that, you get inspected, you have to make time, you have to meet them there. It costs money, it costs time. And like Dave said, we don't just eat that cost, right? We pass that along to whoever's paying us rent. So if your rent was $500 for a one-bedroom apartment by NDSU, it is now $550 or $600 a month. It doesn't just get eaten by us. I owned land. I owned apartments in Fargo and in Moorhead. And I will tell you, the Fargo apartments were awesome. Easy to own, easy to get out, easy to rent. People loved it. The ones in Moorhead were a nightmare. There was so much bureaucracy. We had a bad tenant there, and it took 6 months to get them out. They were paying zero rent. And when I got them out finally, guess what we had to do? We had to fix the place, then we had to charge more rent to get our money back from what they didn't do, what they didn't pay in the past. So we worry about housing in Fargo. We worry about affordable housing. We worry about not only homes, but apartments. And then we want to add, like Dave said, more bureaucracy to the system and say, we're doing a good thing. We're not doing a good thing. Are Moorhead apartments better than Fargo apartments? I don't think so. But they have a registry and we don't. So ask yourself, are they doing a better job than we are? And they're not. Fargo is a much more attractive housing market. It's cheaper, it's better, and like Dave said, there's more options. And there's more people buying places and fixing them up and renting them out because there's not so much bureaucracy. So Moorhead's a nightmare, Fargo is not. We can learn just across the river what we should and shouldn't do, and we should not do this. Arlette, I understand. You want to stand up for the renter and you want to do a good thing. This is not the way to do it. Please trust me.
Mr. Strand.
Thank you, Mayor. Routinely, we're hearing from Bruce Tarleson, who's coming up to us and informing us of out-of-code properties in our city, and we're all aware of how big of a problem that is in our community. you like that inspection, but you don't like other inspections. We don't care as much about somebody who might be living in an unsafe environment, but we do about houses. I mean, I don't get this double standard. You know, if we're going to have people living in apartments, we can have some standards that say they're going to be safe. We can have some standards that say they're not going to be full of mold. We can have some standards that say you're going to have some criteria to make sure that those people aren't at risk living in, and you know, what is it, $5 a month or something? I would say let's find out what Commissioner Preston's proposal turns out to be before we find out and decide this is too big of a burden for the capitalistic society to bear.
Commissioner Preston?
So let me clarify. This is not a renter protection issue like you're referring to, Commissioner Gehrig. There would be no attempt to stop eviction if indeed somebody is not paying their rent. That's not what this program is all about. What it's all about is apartments being rented out without proper egress for escaping a fire. I have a nephew who used to live in an apartment like that. And yes, he was an NDSU student, and yes, he could have left, but he didn't. He stayed. And it was an unsafe situation. Secondly, Grand Forks has a program like this, and yes, they saw big improvements just by establishing the standards for those absentee owner type of housing. So it does make a difference. The third point is, this is part of the core neighborhood plan. And we all sat here enthusiastic about the core neighborhood plan. This is where the rubber meets the road. We have got to be willing to start making some inroads to improving these neighborhoods, and this is part of it.
Mr. Pepcorn?
Mr. Chair, so just a couple things. First of all, Bruce Tarleson is awesome, man. Our inspections department has a great liaison commissioner, and they kick ass. And the best part is, during COVID, inspections it was difficult to get into apartments, and so they are behind. We are going to add, I believe, another position. Inspections is where the rubber meets the road. And so we already have that in the budget. It's not going to cost any money. When you hear this, this is just good intentions, and the line is, we're from the government and we're here to help you. And the bottom line, I want all your renters to know out there, ask yourself, is this going to lower my rent or raise my rent? Thank you.
Mr. Gehrig?
So we weren't all enthusiastic about the core neighborhood plan. I wasn't enthusiastic about it.
Take that.
So when I bought my first home, I had 5 people live with me, right? So I had my sister, I had a couple of friends from college, I had a girlfriend, they all lived with me. So am I gonna have someone come into my home and inspect my home, my personal home, and tell them they all have to leave because X, Y, or Z, right? There are greater implications here than you think of. This is a normal scenario. You have young people buying homes and having people rent, and you also have college folks who buy a home and rent, things like that. So the implications are greater than the guy who owns a 95-door apartment complex. That I understand. But you're dipping into now the first-time home buyer who has 5 to 1 roommate. If I have 1 roommate, do I have to let the Fargo inspection company come in and make sure I have whatever, egress windows or whatever? I don't know whether that's a good idea. You say it's not about protectionism, but it is for that exact reason. If my sister lives in my basement and the egress window is not up to standards, she can choose to live there or not, right? So this is not just about the big companies. This is about regular people who own just a home or 2 homes or maybe 3 homes, and people live there with them. So it's well above and beyond that. And again, to Dave's point, and I would say a different way, but it is going to raise the cost of housing. And we are all afraid of people moving here, staying here, living here, but we're going to make it harder to stay here, more expensive to stay here, and then we're going to say we're doing a good job. I don't think that's good. Fargo housing, in my opinion, is better than Moorhead's. And we don't have a registry, they do.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Preston?
I can't answer all those questions because that is what this process is all about. to try to figure out how and what kind of situations we would be inspecting and creating this licensure for. So all I'm asking here is that we have the staff sit down and figure out what that would look like and come back to us.
So a couple of points when I looked over this as an item. We have the #1 rental market in the nation right now, so that tells me we have great options within the environment. Number 2, in my planning department, it's down 4 people. We have on there in addition a core neighborhood planner that is going to be hired. Really would like that person to look at the core neighborhood plan and then decide if that person says we need to have a rental registry or something that's important to that area. We just asked to add another inspection person in the inspection department, because if you ask G. Thorelson, he says it's not only rental houses that are a problem, it's also the homes that are a problem. And you have to get out there and inspect the homes, inspect the rental, inspect what's going on. NDSU has made tremendous gains in adding rentals closer to the university, which is putting more vacancies in our Roosevelt neighborhood, because now the borderline rental places people aren't renting. So the market is somewhat dictating that. I think for us to put this in as well, when you look at Moorhead rental registration, that's 5 or 6 people in the staff. So do you want me to add that to the budget for 2022? Because in a sense, you're making budgetary impacts on this. And Commissioner Preston, you usually follow process. So to me is, why are we jumping ahead of the process? It hasn't gone to Planning Commission, and hasn't gone input from the rentals and owners. We haven't got any input on this at all. And we're jumping ahead and saying, boy, we're not quite sure what it'll look like, but we want to study it right now. And I just think if we follow process, we do our core neighborhood planner that we hire, that person will look at the core neighborhood plan. If this is part of the discussion, that will happen. And then we'd follow the usual process. We run it through our usual commission or planning department in different areas. And this impacts a lot of departments. It's not only planning, it's inspections, it's a lot of different areas. So I would say that we're premature on this request at this time, but I'll see what you vote on out. Any other discussion? Commissioner Strand.
Absolutely, Mayor, thank you. You know, let's look at the Roosevelt neighborhood. Let's look at an example in the results of our policies, where we have 70-some% of those homes owned by absentee owners and turned into rental properties and run into the ground. And then we have crime rates escalating, property crimes, we have things going up. If we don't address the Roosevelt neighborhood, I'm telling you, it's a canary in the coal mine for the rest of our neighborhoods. Now, I don't think Commissioner Preston's proposal here is looking at the Gold Marks and the Campbells. It's looking at those neighborhood houses that are owned by people who don't even give a crap and don't live here too often. I think it's on our shoulders to address this issue and provide those people in those homes safety, safe environments, safe homes, safe structures. You know, I think that's what this is addressing. I want to hear, when this is vetted, what others have done with rental registries. What are the successes? What are the pros? What are the cons? I don't know any reason not to do that. We have 60% of our people living in apartments. In 1990, we had 60% of our people living in homes. It's shifted. So all I know is we have a lot of people that if we're not their voice, who is?
Mr. Chairman?
Commissioner Preston.
So, you know, I guess my thought is here in regards to the planning staff taking the lead. For one thing, 2 planning staff were requested. One, so far, has gotten into the budget. That person is going to do the rehab program, more than likely. There's also the LDC, the growth plan, implementation of this plan. If we expect the staff to be taking on issues such as this one, which is more of a political issue, it is a policy issue, we're going to be waiting probably a long time. We have, in fact, just recently, we had a fairly large staff meeting trying to figure out how to deal with a problem property just on the south side of downtown. We're going to continue to have those complaints coming to us unless we have some kind of program that the staff can have some some enforcement force with it. And that's what's missing right now. There really is a minimal amount of enforcement that can happen right now with problem properties. Code enforcement, they've been trying, inspections have been trying, law enforcement has been trying. So I just think that's something that we can take out of the core neighborhood plan and move forward with it. And I don't think it's premature.
Commissioner Gehrig.
Well, John, I resent that. I live in Roosevelt, and it is not 70% rentals. Washington is 60%, which is north of us. Roosevelt is not. I also resent it because I own properties, and I kept those properties up. And just because Big Brother wasn't over my shoulder making sure that I was doing the right thing, I was doing the right thing. And the vast majority of people who rent or own properties and rent them out do the right thing. And to Dave's point, if they don't get renters. So again, this is not a magic bullet. Moorhead has tried it. Other communities have tried it. It does nothing but increases the cost. And it's not just the fee for the registry. It's every little thing they find. Well, that thing here and that thing there, and you have to fix those things. Have them come back. You can't rent it out till we do this, that, and the other thing. It's the lost things that you don't see. So again, time, energy, more staff, and what are we fixing? We're not fixing anything. Fargo, to Tim's point, is one of the best places to live in the United States. We're not fixing anything. We are causing more problems.
Mr. Chairman?
Commissioner Preston.
So then I've got to ask you, Commissioner Gehrig. So having the ability to get out when there's a fire, having water consistently available and turned on, having the basic health, safety kinds of things in a home, if that increases the rent a bit, I would say good.
Give me 5 examples that you've seen this.
Gehrig.
Give me 5 examples where you've walked into a rental and said, yep, those are all off. You can't do it. These are already code issues. What you're saying is, we need to, not only do we have codes, but now we're gonna go check those codes. They already do these things. If you make an improvement on a rental, you have to get a license to do that. You have to put it on your window outside and do those things. And then you get inspected after that. You're already doing these things, but you're talking about a new police force to come in. There has to be 3, 4, 5, 10 people in the city of Fargo to go look at all these things. You're talking about $1 million implication in our budget. That is not a small deal. So you can make the boogeyman up if you want, but it's not happening.
One more reply,
Preston.
and then I'll be quiet.
Point, counterpoint all
Forks.
night here.
Grand Forks added, I believe it was 1.5 staff.
Wouldn't do anything.
Their program is